allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Move to approve regular agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to remove a couple things from the regular agenda.
Mr. Carr, what would you like to remove?
You need a second to do that, or no?
Well,
discussion
you might
or no?
want to talk, you might want to
Okay,
talk about
whatever you run. You're running the meeting, sir.
Yep.
At the last meeting, we had a little discussion about having stuff on the agenda. Number 8 discussion items, and
Please. Go ahead, Mr. Carr.
And I suggested and strongly suggested that if anybody wants to put anything on there, they certainly can. We need to have documentation. We have people that read the packets. This information is out to the public so they can see what's going to be talked about in the information that will be provided for each item. So we needed to have that in the packet so that we can have an intelligent discussion about these items. And I said at that time that if we did not have that, I would make a motion to remove these items from the agenda. And what I have I talked to our administrator under number discussion items A, number 1, there's no backup information for that. There was nothing in the packet. Number 3, no information in the packet, nothing to talk about, no information. And town hall use policy number 5. Some of the other things that's great. That's all we asked. That's all I wanted. So I would make a motion to approve the regular agenda with those 3 items pulled.
Do I have a second on that?
I'll second.
You'll second that. Very good. All those in
for
favor?
discussion?
Oh, go ahead and discuss, Larry.
Discussion.
Go ahead.
All
Be
right,
quick.
as long as I have the floor, we'll just keep talking and get
Yeah, let's-
what I have to get
let's
done,
go ahead
Mr.
and be
Mayor.
efficient.
Let's be a little courteous here.
Let's be efficient.
The complaint process, I believe we do know, you could have looked at the complaint process going forward. It's probably a short discussion Mr. Cedarstrom has that we can go on. The gas tax, I did provide our city clerk an email providing information on the gas tax. I see it was not put in our package, so it was provided, it was sent, but that's okay. I can go over that briefly as we allow that to be discussed. We were invited to go down to the state legislature. We did meet with the legislature, and we did discuss this. I mean, the city council and the staff was invited. Mr. Satterstrom and myself took the time to go down there, so we will update you on the discussion, the tax, gas tax bill. Town hall use policy. What has to be in a packet? Didn't you review your town hall policy before you came here? The citizens of Grant have been denied the right to use their own
Okay,
town hall.
well, we're talking about the items that I asked to be pulled, so
That's
Thanks.
right. So I asked that this be allowed to move forward
Yep.
and be
And
spoken on.
we have this on the floor, so let's go ahead and
I
vote on it.
respectfully reject that.
Yes, and I understand
Of
that.
course,
There's a
and if you
motion.
don't want to,
There's a
you'll find it
motion
on the
and a second
grantreporter.com.
on the floor. Enough, Larry.
Enough, Jeff.
Publicizing your political sites here is just distasteful and below you as a council member. Please refrain from doing so.
Yeah, your arrogance is
Mr.
shown
Carr.
once more, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you,
Mr. Mayor, and I would also add that if this would like to be put on the next agenda with documentation, I would be glad to discuss them, but
All
they're
have
not.
you
So
all have the
there we
town
go.
hall
All right.
policy.
Please call the motion. Mr.
Yep,
Mayor.
go ahead. We're going to go ahead and do that. All those in favor of removing those, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those in favor of keeping those, please say no.
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 All right, thanks very much, gentlemen. We're going to go ahead and.
I'll make a
look for-
motion to
Okay,
approve the
pull
consent
stuff on
agenda.
the consent agenda.
Sorry, Tom beat you on that one.
No, this isn't a
motion
race
to
for
approve the
Christ's sake,
consent
John. You are an arrogant.
Will you stop with the name calling and try to get business done? I mean, I know
No,
it's
you're
hard
not.
for
You're
you.
not trying to do the work of the
So
citizens.
you've moved to approve the regular agenda. Do we have a second?
Danny approves.
Second.
Danny has a second. All those in favor
Second
of-
hand, Denny, wait a minute.
All of those in
let's-
favor of approving the
let's have a
regular
discussion.
agenda, please say
Discussion.
yes.
Point of order.
Point of order.
Yes, thank
Point of
you.
order.
You're all done, gentlemen. We're all
Point of
done.
order.
All done. The Larry Lanu
We
show
have a
is over.
dictatorship here, folks.
No, what we
Nothing's
have is a
changed.
minority that doesn't understand it goes 3-2. It's called a democracy. You might want to look
All
that
right.
up.
According to Huber's
All
Rules
right,
of Order, not
here we
Robert's
go.
Rules of Order.
Moving right to
Jeffrey, those-
staff
you
agenda
can once again
items.
find it on the grantreporter.com.
Please, enough. Denny?
Mr. Huber?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
May I remind the gentleman on the other end of the table, please, the consent agenda for the most part is regular bills paid by the city.
I know
and
exactly
audited
what
at
it
the
is.
end of the-
And our council minutes were gonna be requested to be pulled, and our council minutes are not accurate. I put the
you
corrections into the city clerk,
And that's the
And they
case
were
every
not
single
made.
month, isn't it?
Every single
Every
month.
single
That's right.
meeting.
Every single
because
month.
we
It's
do not have
amazing.
accurate city council minutes.
We're all done
We're
with
going to
that.
litigation, Jeff, you're
Brad
familiar with it.
Reestick, you're up.
Mayor, members of the council, you should have before you a memo that includes 2 exhibits and a quote from a contractor to install guardrails at 2 locations in the city of Grant. The first location is 83rd Street, just southwest of Town Hall here. And the other location is on Ironwood Avenue in the northwest part of the city. The contractor's quote was for $40,000 to install. There's 5 segments on 83rd Street, and I believe 2 segments on Ironwood Avenue. The budget that we have available for this project is roughly $30,000. So I've made recommendations to eliminate a couple sections on the exhibit. I noticed that the IDs weren't shown on the exhibit that I have here, but segments A, B, C, D, and E on the 83rd Street exhibit goes from left to right. So I had recommended eliminating sections A, B, and E to reduce the cost of the project to fit within the budget. If we were to reduce those 3 segments, the approximate cost would be $25,000. So I guess I'm looking for a motion from council to move forward with the
Also move.
I'll second it for discussion.
Second for discussion, Larry.
All right, Brad, I assume by now most of us have probably driven the sites and looked at them. And I would ask if, in your putting together a project, or a project for guardrail, and I thank you for that activity, have you considered Keats Avenue, which was recently raised 2 foot, along with Jocelyn Avenue in that study? Have you, on these areas that you're considering for a guardrail, our city several years purchased road counting equipment. Have you done a road study as far as a traffic pattern going in there? What is the history of cars going into these ditches where we're putting guardrails? And I believe they are. I drove them. They're steep. But I did meet with Commissioner Fran Myron, and he is very concerned that one of our main arteries in our city is an arterial road, is Keats Avenue, which recently got raised 2 foot. Now, if you drive along there and you look right now, there's about an 8 to 10 foot embankment right there, steep curve. And I've talked to Mr. Reagan over there that he said since that road's been raised and 36 has opened up, the traffic has increased quite a bit. So my question to you, have you done a road study count? And with the mobilization cost, would we not be wise to include those so we have one mobilization charge for moving forward? As you know, the 65 Street Road project is not going to be done this year because it wasn't done in a timely fashion to get decent prices to allow the contractors to get done, and our city was going to self-fund that. Could we self-fund and put the guardrail where needed with the most traffic and most exposure, as Mr. Myron suggested, and get it done yet this year?
Okay, that's pretty complex. Go ahead and answer the questions you can
So
remember.
no, we have not done any traffic delineators or traffic counts on Keats Avenue. We were directed, staff was directed in early May or April to look at these 2 locations, and so that's the locations that we looked at, so.
Okay, thank you, Brett.
May
Ma'am,
I
can you,
finish?
hang on a second, Larry, let me get some of your questions answered for you before you keep talking here. Kim, as I understand it, those two raised roads that we did to benefit the Sunnybrook Lake area to minimize the impacts of flooding to those two roads, we did that on a somewhat of an emergency basis. As I understand, our road contractor is still scheduled to go out there and widen and make those roads much, much closer to what they were in terms of the width. Is that correct?
Mayor and council members, the road contractor will be out there to make those, the side of the roads less steep. There's still gonna be work done on that.
Okay.
And signs have been ordered to mark the area that there is a steep bank.
Okay, well, hopefully people will slow down there. Let's get back to the discussion on these two here. Brad, if we can take a look at the Woodpile Lake one, the 83rd one, if we could all turn to that real quick. You know, this map is obviously oriented for those of us familiar with the area. The Keats Avenue in the center there, that would be a road heading north. Okay, so we've got our north is right at the top of our photo, for those of you with this photo. Coming from the west, going to the east, right where the road enters the photo here, Mr. Carr reminded me of this, and I remember it now too. There's quite a steep little hill coming here, so you kind of lose sight of the road when you're coming over it, and then when you come back down, it's quite sudden. So all of a sudden you're in that road and you've got traffic coming from this way. Now, if that traffic coming west has taken up perhaps a little bit more of the road than advised, you really have nowhere to go if you're heading east there. So, you know, I wonder if the council would recommend or consider keeping that first section there to sort of safeguard those oncoming traffic interactions from east to west there, and sacrifice, in the name of Costa, perhaps moving some guardrail to other areas as they're properly identified. Getting rid of the one on the far eastern edge, because that's a pretty gradual curve there. I wonder if anyone would consider that. Mr. Carr.
Well, I think the sight lines are as important as the steepness. There's certainly Keats is steep. It's always been that way. And as more dirt's piled on, it's steeper. Always been. Always been. And it probably needs to be looked at. But we have many roads in Grant that are like that. We don't have one as steep as this with the sight lines that we have, with the danger of Woodpile Lake there. And over the years, there have been a lot of cars that have gone over that edge. It caught the shoulder, rolled, whatever. It's just a really bad corner. And a lot of people coming up, and you know, on gravel road, a lot of times people aren't driving. There's no center line, so you're just kind of wherever, and it can be a problem. So I think that's a good idea. What the mayor said is to do a couple sections there. I'm not sure, I mean, you said we had $30,000 for this?
Yeah,
And
roughly
we're up to
30.
40 on this?
Right.
So if we, I think if we could stay, I mean, I'm a firm believer in budgeting and staying within our budget. We have a little extra money. I'm not against putting some guardrails up on Keats. I think that's, might be a good idea. Again, we've paved Keats a couple times. I think for safety, a safety issue on Keats, we put the guardrails up before we finish that paving project, but that's just me. So, I think it was a good suggestion by the mayor. I don't know if I really wanna go over budget on that.
Yep. Kim, you had something to add here.
Just gonna add, Mayor and council members, it's my understanding from two previous longtime road commissioners that these two areas with the guardrails have been on the list for a very, very long time to be accomplished.
Well, these were pushed back. If I remember correctly, I think most of the council remembers, when we went ahead and did the Sunnybrook thing, we actually moved that Sunnybrook project, the flooding project, ahead of these projects. These projects were slated to be done ahead of that Sunnybrook road raising, but we jumped in there and got that done to help those folks in the Sunnybrook neighborhood with that.
This was
flooding.
on earlier in the spring.
That's correct. It was on earlier in the spring, and now we're sort of playing catch-up. So let's talk about Tom's budgeting point here for a moment. Larry, I'll get to you in a second. Brad, do we have some idea of, by just eliminating that far eastern segment of this on 83rd, how much money we would save? Can we give an estimate there on that?
You know, just looking at the anchors, it's about $2,000 for each anchor. There's 2 anchors there, so that's $4,000 plus $10 of lineal foot. And there's approximately 280 feet there, so you're roughly talking about $6,000.
$6,500 there, huh? Okay, and that gets us down to, say, $34,000. We're $4,000 over budget. We've created some safer areas, and the mayor, Tina's right, one of our commenters here, he's got a lot of history here. If cars have gone in the lake, he'd know. He probably did it when he was younger.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. That was personal experience talking.
I'll vote on that.
It was icy that time. It was not speed, but, okay.
All right, Brad, I go back to, well, one of the questions I said, you were directed to put this together. Can you tell me who directed you?
Well, council directed us back in May to look at these two locations and put together
Okay. So my question is, we have mobilization costs of $4,000. So if we put some of that stuff together, our city has the money to self-fund. I mean, we can put it off till next year and add these on, but we'll be getting charged mobilization all over again. That mobilization cost right here is a little over about 10% of your budget that you have, according to the documentation you have printed here. So might be wise to put it all together, let the city fund it right now. It's the same thing we did on Keats earlier. We had a project, $75,000. We said, let's do 25 this year, 25,000 next year, and every year we get charged mobilization. If we would have done it all at one time, self-funded it, it would have been done. In fact, that last third part of the road has never been done, because we kicked it down the road. We'll talk about why, in gas tax, I mean, $1 spent now in maintenance, and stuff, will save you about $7,000 in maintenance now. If we do it wisely now, and we go out, talk to the contractor, why are we gonna pay mobilization to come and do it again next year?
Mr. Carr, yeah, we're not talking about that.
And we're talking mobilization, Brad, I mean, to Larry's point, I get what he's saying, he's trying to save the city $4 grand. I get it, I wanna save $4 grand and put in more guardrail. But, as far as the mobilization fee, has there ever been any, just the fact that they gotta get their stuff out there costs $4 grand? Will it cost $4
Yeah,
grand
so-
next year?
Yep.
It would,
I would assume that it's gonna be fairly high.
make a deal and
It's just
say,
a small quantity for them.
no, I get it.
If I may, if there's one thing the former road commissioner taught me, and through many back and forths at this table, I really miss those guys. It was fun to talk to them, taught each other a lot, miss those guys. But what the former road commissioner taught me, Mr. Bonin, was that mobilization fees are a fact of life. And we are going to be paying those for, especially in this case, specialized contractors to come out. The other road on Keats the work hasn't been done in order for the guardrails to be done. So it would be a little bit difficult to save the mobilization fee, but the road is not even prepared to have guardrails put on it. I'd like to save money as much as others. But the mobilization fees are just a fact of life. And the argument reduced to its essence is, if we did everything at once, we'd save a lot of money. Well, if I had the money to do everything at once, I probably would save a lot of money. But I don't have the money to do everything at once. Larry, wrap it up, and then we're gonna
wrap
move.
up, Brad. Have you driven Keats lately?
Sure,
Do you understand that
I have.
all the shouldering has been done and the city's probably been billed for it? So, because you guys are all talking like it still has to be done. Drive it today. You'll see the shouldering has been done. The soil is in place. The guardrail can be done right now. Our mayor and our other councilmen haven't taken the time to drive the road to understand the issues.
Could have asked me. Sure I have. Of course
Well,
I have.
did you know it was all shouldered and done? You just told us a
I've
minute
been-
ago it wasn't, Jeff.
Oh,
You
Larry.
either got to tell the truth or not.
Yeah, I've been on it, Larry, and frankly,
Well, then why did you say it hasn't been done?
Do I get to answer? Or are you ready?
Go ahead.
Can I answer?
Like to see you
Excellent.
watch in light of the citizens. Go ahead.
Nice. Here's the straight up truth of it, Larry. The road itself has not been determined that it needs a guardrail. You and I might think
You
it
just
needs.
said it wasn't
You and I
filled in.
might think it needs a guardrail. It hasn't been determined yet. My information is the contractor still has additional work to do out there to widen that road. I did not know that you were riding along with the contractors to know when they were done doing their work, but it's good to know that you're riding along with them to know that their work is completely done, Larry.
Be nice
Thank
if you would have looked at it before you came out and spoke falsely to the citizens of Grant.
Okay, go ahead,
Just to
Tom.
wrap it up, Keats,
Yeah,
the
wrap it.
sightlines are better there. Yes, it's steep, but people
Yep.
can see each other coming and they're careful and they slow down and it's, so I don't think it's desperate. Yes, does it need to be done? Probably, yes.
Yeah, Danny.
Well, just one last comment on that. I don't think it makes a lot of sense to put the guardrails up already when we really don't know what's gonna happen down there.
Yeah.
We're all working on other things, right?
And
You
the
don't know
last-
what's
and the
good.
last
It's
one
all
is-
been-
You don't have the floor, we're not gonna yell back and forth, please. We're not gonna yell back and forth. Let's try to keep it professional.
The
Mr.
last
Carr.
point, I don't see any sense in going in arrears, basically, for guardrails when we can just budget it for next year. And, and we,
Twice the mobilization.
It was supposed to have been done in the spring.
Yeah, and, okay, gentlemen, if we have an understanding that on 83rd to delete that one on the far eastern edge as at least the least necessary segment of that, if that's a good way to put it, the least necessary segment of that. If we take a look at the Ironwood one, and I drove this one today. I drove real slow though. Both of these pond edges here are quite close. And I know that this one has been talked about. Steve, I talked to Steve Bonin again, oh gosh, a long time ago on this, years, and he was telling me, hey, get it done before somebody goes in. Yeah, 2002, a long time ago we talked about this. So this one, I'd say both of these segments go on. And, you know, Tom, I am gonna talk just to the cost for a second. I will vote for both of these segments. I will vote for Woodpile with the exception of the far eastern one, and I will go slightly over budget, about $4,000 to $5,000. Well, and the reason being is, we jumped on Sunnybrook, we raised those roads, we got that done, and these are still outstanding safety issues, so they need to be taken care of. So, I don't believe I have a motion and a second on the floor to approve this as stated.
I'll make a motion to approve as stated with that one section of the guardrail deleted.
Okay. Do I have a second on this, please?
Second?
Yes.
All right,
We got a
second.
second? We got Denny seconding this. All those in favor of approving this project as amended, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those not in favor, please say nay. Nay. 3 to 2. Thank you, gentlemen.
Things never change, folks.
Okay.
We're concerned about safety. You're not. I got it. All right, Jennifer Haskamp, you're up. After it settles down, you're up.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. If I can go ahead and just have the PowerPoint right out of the gate, I think that'll save some time.
Okay.
So before you this evening, we have an application for a text amendment to allow for community solar gardens in the community. A little bit of background with respect to the application, because I think there's a little bit of confusion, or at least what I've heard to be a little bit of confusion. The first thing is that the applicant is actually U.S. Solar. Our ordinance today allows an applicant or an application to be made to amend our text or our zoning map by either a property owner, the planning commission, or the city council. Essentially, those are the bodies that have the ability to ask for an amendment. In this case, U.S. Solar is the applicant, but they are partnered with the owner who has an interest in potentially having a community solar garden on their property. There's no project that's being proposed tonight. It's simply the text amendment. So if it were to be approved, there would be a conditional use permit process. Likely that would be for the specific project. So I just want to make sure that clarification is understood in terms of how we got here. As I stated, the request really related to community solar gardens and did not address residential installations, which at this time are also not addressed within our ordinance. So as you all may recall, the city council actually adopted a moratorium on solar developments of any type in the community, so that we had the ability to go forward and study this issue and determine how and if it should be addressed within the ordinance. That moratorium actually was put in place prior to the application being made. So the applicant was aware of the moratorium, knew that that was in place when they made the application, and said, we'd like to work with you through the process, essentially. But I just want to make it clear that the moratorium was in place before the application was made. In terms of the application itself, there's a public hearing that was held at the Planning Commission meeting on July 18th, 2017. That related specifically to the language that was included in the applicant's application, which is in your packets this evening, so you could see exactly what U.S. Solar was proposing at that time. So based on that, we went to the first Planning Commission meeting in July. The Planning Commission at that time reviewed the application as it was submitted specifically. So the language that was provided did not have anything with respect to performance standards. It simply just said, let's change the table of uses. It was sort of a starting point with respect to how the text might be amended. That was what was considered during the public hearing, because that was the application that was made. At that meeting, the Planning Commission had a pretty good discussion. We heard public testimony, and during that discussion, there was a lot of talk about how it was inadequate, that it didn't address enough information and performance standards. And the Planning Commission actually asked the applicant in this case and said, would you be willing to continue and work with the city and city staff through this process to make a more robust text amendment? During that meeting, the applicant stated yes, they'd be willing to do that. And as part of that, the Planning Commission also requested staff to take a look at residential installations, not just community solar gardens, because obviously the moratorium addressed both, and the applicant really cared about community solar gardens, not necessarily the residential application. So given that, the Planning Commission gave a little bit of direction with respect to what they wanted to see in an ordinance that came back, and staff went forward and worked with the applicant to determine a more robust ordinance, which is what you have in your packets this evening. So the more robust ordinance, if you will, it has the performance standards and also addresses residential systems, was presented to the Planning Commission at our last meeting in September, at which point in time we took a look at the ordinance as it was prepared with respect to some performance standards, things such as lot sizes, additional setbacks, screening, those types of issues that were placed into the draft ordinance for their consideration. After that discussion, and after reviewing the ordinance, there was a little bit of back and forth with the applicant. The discussion really by the Planning Commission in September focused on a couple key issues. The first one being the screening requirement and determining what was appropriate with respect to screening. There was quite a bit of discussion about what the appropriate lot size was, whether or not a 20-acre minimum was appropriate or whether it should be bigger. Access, how, is it a county road? Would it be acceptable if it was a city road, et cetera? Ultimately, the language that's in front of you this evening is what the Planning Commission was comfortable with. And the Planning Commission essentially, by a vote of 5-1, determined that they felt like the solar ordinance as presented, which included community and residential, just to be clear, was consistent with the comprehensive plan and that it would maintain the city's rural character. That was the Planning Commission's finding based on what they heard. As I stated, we worked collaboratively with the applicant to come up with a more robust ordinance. That's what's in front of you. You'll see that there's amendments or changes that are proposed to the table of uses. There's a new Division 5 solar energy systems that would apply to both residential and community solar gardens. So if you look at the draft text that's in front of you, it actually adds Division 5 to the ordinance. There's a couple of purposes for that. The first one being that if that were to be amended in the future, it's its own standalone section. Therefore, if there's something that's found to be inadequate or inappropriate or doesn't meet the intent of the city, there is a specific location in which the material is or the ordinance language is that could be amended. And then just to clarify, the applicant came up with a lot of the proposed language with respect to the community solar gardens while staff worked on the residential portions. So you'll see in the ordinance this evening, there's basically 3 sections. So this is the table of uses. I apologize to those in the audience who might have a hard time reading it. But you'll see that the community solar garden as proposed in the ordinance would be allowed in A1 and A2 after issuance of a conditional use permit. The residential solar energy system is building mounted, so if there was a solar panel installation on a roof, for example, that would simply be permitted in all of the zoning districts, A1, A2, R1, and general business. The idea here obviously is the structure already exists. It would be on a principal or an accessory building, which you saw, I'm sure, in the language. There's no minimum lot size requirements, et cetera. It could simply be affixed to the roof of any residential structure that's in the community. Obviously, it would need a building permit and other types of requirements. The second is the residential solar energy systems, ground-mounted. So that's a ground-mounted solar array, for those of you who have taken a look at those before. You'll see in A1, A2, R1, and GB, those would be allowed with a certificate of compliance. The idea being that staff would need to take a look and make sure that whatever is being proposed met setbacks, and then also met the performance standards that were as drafted in your ordinance this evening. With respect to the building mounted performance standards, just summarize them really quickly here. I won't get into all of them, but essentially, again, it could be a principal or accessory building. Would have to meet the setback requirements, a maximum pitch, reducing glare, all of those types of things. It would require a building permit. Depending on the conditions of the site, there might be additional conditions that would be necessary, but that would really be on a case-by-case basis. So that language is in there. With respect to the ground-mounted performance standards, and actually we had a member of the public who spoke a little bit about this in the public comment. The ground-mounted is where some additional setback requirements came into play, and also that the idea that the ground-mounted array would have to be accessory to a principal structure. So we have a lot of situations like that in the community where if there's an accessory, obviously if there's an accessory building in the community, there has to be a principal structure on the site first. So very consistent with that. With respect to the minimum lot size requirement, of course, again, this goes back to some of the concerns that the planning commissioners discussed with respect to sightlines, adjacent residential structures, being able to see a ground-mounted array, for example. So really having to do with the visual impact that it might have. Again, there's similar requirements that there might be some landscaping or screening that would be required. They'd have to meet building codes, et cetera, positioned to eliminate glare, kind of the standard. With respect to the community solar energy system, so this is actually the portion of the ordinance that obviously the applicant is most concerned with. You'll see that those standards also had some performance standards, the first one being that they must be located on a site that's 20 acres or greater. So there would have to be a minimum lot size, and whatever conditional use permit got issued would have to be recorded against all of the property affected, so to meet that minimum 20 acres. The site would have to have primary frontage and access from a county or state road, so the installation of such facility would have to occur, and the access would have to come from a county or state road. Again, there's a 100-foot, in this case, property line if it's shared with a residential structure. So the idea being that the adjacent lot line, where a resident might be or a residential structure might be adjacent to it, that the setback would have to be a minimum of 100 feet from that location. I should note that if you were to consider the ground mounted for the residential, this language wasn't modified for that as well, but for consistency purposes, that might be something that we'd be interested in taking a look at as well. In terms of submittal requirements, obviously, when we have performance standards, oftentimes there are performance standards that are above what our traditional conditional use permit requirements might be. This is just a quick summary of some of those things that would relate to solar, or the community solar garden in particular. So things like a screening and a landscape plan with a cross section. Obviously, the primary concern here being about visual screening and making sure that from adjacent residential structures and public rights of way that the screening is accomplished, for example, and that's what a cross section would hopefully do in terms of the objective. Foundations, interconnection status, power and communication lines, et cetera, and also a decommissioning plan. Obviously, the decommissioning plan being if the facility is no longer operational, how does it get removed, and making sure that that happens properly. So with that, that's kind of a high-level summary of the ordinance changes that were recommended to you this evening. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Gentlemen? Larry?
Jennifer, as far as your larger solar garden, there's probably only about 4 or 5 locations in our city that are applicable. They have to be along a 3-phase power line, a grid which is basically Manning and 75th over here. So we're limited to probably, other than the golf courses and the school, probably about 4 sites in the entire city that would be eligible for large solar gardens. So we're not talking about solar gardens throughout our whole city, driving everywhere you look. It's very limited. I'm assuming that the federal government has regulations. Basically, if we were to oppose and say we absolutely forbid them, I think we'd get into litigation. If our city said we absolutely oppose any form of solar deals, and so at this time I'd like to thank the gentleman that prepared and worked with you on there, because as your planning commission has looked at and decided, did a pretty fair job. I don't think that there's been a whole lot of changing that's done, so I want to commend him for his work that's being done. And at this point, I'd like a motion to accept the resolution for the text amendment for solar gardens and grant.
I'd second that.
Discussion. Tom?
I'm kind of shocked, actually, by Mr. Lanou recommending this. I went
Expect from an
through,
electrician, Tom.
I went through the comp plan, which is basically our constitution of what we want. Going through the comp plan, talks about all kinds of stuff. Talks about private solar, which I'm perfectly fine with. What it does talk about, though, is the fact that the city grant was supposed to develop with large residential lots, no increased commercial, and to keep our scenic views and our rural character. In my opinion, this doesn't do that. It may be very few spots in Grant, as Mr. Lanu said, that would apply. So then it would get me to wondering then why apply it if there's so few spots? If there's not a mandate for something like this, because there are a lot of spots, and maybe that would help keep Grant, in a different view maybe, Grant. And that would be something the residents would have to say they want. And that's in the comp plan. I worked on the comp plan, 2008 comp plan. We're working on it again. And I don't see myself adding solar power plants, commercial power plants, which what it is, it's not a garden and it's not a farm. It's a commercial solar power plant in Grant. I don't think we need them. I'm all for people, and I'm thank you very much for standing up and talking about residential, because I think that's way too restrictive for people, and I'm gonna talk about that when we get to the point. I'm also shocked that Larry, who brought up the charter to defend our Constitution, which is the comp plan, has totally decided to ignore it in a case to put this in somewhere where it shouldn't belong. So that's part of my shock and awe that Larry would do this.
You're shocking
So
us. He's talking, Larry.
He's talking,
I
Larry.
can cite chapter and verse from the comp plan that we all worked on, planning commissions worked on it, council people worked on it, staff worked on it, a lot of residents worked on it to keep Grant rural. And I could not look them in the eye when they drive by a solar power plant down on the corner and they go, what in the world is going on? And I could not look them in the eye and say, this is gonna keep us rural, because it's not. The city of Grant, for a long time, the best way to keep us rural is to put a big, nice new house on a 10-acre residential lot, and then let anybody try to come in, tear that down and develop, because they can't. It's not worth the money. So that'll keep people out. And that's what we decided a long time ago, and that's what we did. So I'm totally against the commercial part of this. As far as the residential, I think we ought to talk about setbacks. I think we have a lot of 1-acre lots, and if they want to have solar, I'm all for that. But then we have to get into sizing, the same way we do with outbuildings, whole buildings, different size panels arrays, and I'm not an expert, so somebody will have to help me, of what actually would even make sense to put up. But if you have a 1-acre property and you want to put it on your roof, that's great. I don't think it should be over 35 feet tall.
Yeah.
So if you have a 35-foot tall building, you want to put a 5-foot tall solar array on top of that? No, you can't do that. Take off part of the house or just put one on a porch. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. If you want to put them in your yard, absolutely. Just, I guess it would be the size and the setback and screening for your neighbors. I don't have a problem with that at all.
Okay.
So that's what I have to say.
Okay. We'll get-
Well, one more thing.
please.
Thank you. One more thing I'd like to mention. Scandia, city to the north of us, is just in the September meeting, has voted to repeal their whole solar community garden, solar garden, power plant, ordinance. They're voting to repeal it, so that'll be gone pretty quick. I talked to them, and it does not meet Scandia's rural character either. And per the people I talked to, there's no amount of screening that can hide them. And that's what I was told, so,
Yeah.
that's it.
Thank you. Let me clear up just a couple of quick questions. Jennifer, if I may, just interrupt you for just a second. Did you do a study on how many, under these guidelines, how many solar gardens that really have a place in Grant? Larry, I know he said 1 or 2 or 3. Did you actually do some sort of a study and overview of that?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I went into my GIS quickly, because obviously this came up at the planning commission level as well. And if you look at the 2 corridors in which they could be located, you'll see on page 2 of my staff report, there are approximately 7 to 9 parcels. I can't give you an exact because of ownership reasons, but 7 to 9 parcels that would meet the minimum 20-acre parcel requirement. That would also then, 2 of those are golf courses, and 1 of them is the school site, so it drops down by 3. So then from a GIS perspective, we're at 4 to 6.
4 to 6.
If you pop up to 40-acre minimum, for example, because obviously that's kind of the next increment, if you will, it drops off 1 to 2 parcels. So
Drops to 1 to 2 parcels, or it comes down to 3 to 5?
it drops to 3 to 5.
Drops
So
to
it
3 to
drops
5.
off another parcel.
At 40
or two.
acres. At a
Correct.
40-acre, okay. Just one more follow-up question, then we'll ask some more questions here. Kevin, Mr. Lanu stated that if we were to, because of the federal government wants us to do this, Scandia apparently is not afraid of the federal government. They just remove solar gardens from their use table. Do we face horrendous amounts of litigation if we decide not to have solar gardens in Grant?
I'm not familiar with any federal law that mandates cities to allow these sort of facilities, so although I haven't researched it, I'm not familiar with any such law.
Yeah, that would surprise me. Just a quick comment on this. You know, I agree with Tom in the sense that our comp plan very, very clearly states that we are to develop as a rural residential community. In fact, Tom well knows, and he could probably give us more history on this, the negotiations that took place with the Met Council in order to come up with the 10-acre density and the 5-acre lot sizes. So, and that was with an eye toward homes. Let me make a secondary point on that. Some people have said to me, you know what, money doesn't matter. Money doesn't matter. We've got to hold on to this rural character, and that's what's really true. Unfortunately, 10 minutes ago, I had to delete part of a guardrail system surrounding a lake that's 15 foot from a road where people are doing 45, 50 miles an hour. The reason I did that was money. Okay? So money does matter. Money paves the roads. Money makes people safer in this instance. Money pays for our sheriffs. It pays for our public safety. It pays for our fire. So money is important. And when I look at these systems, and I am going to ask the gentleman to stand up in a bit, and we're going to ask you some questions on this. When I look at these systems, the one thing that they do is they do not, unlike a house, appreciate in value that I'm aware of, and then begin to pay more and more taxes the more they appreciate in value over the years, and then contribute to those dollars that we use to put up guardrails and the dollars we use to maintain the roads. Half the time I got people yelling at me because I'm not maintaining the roads enough. And then half the time I get people yelling at me because there's not enough money. So I'm not quite sure which way to go, but I will tell you this. When I don't build a guardrail for money, I've got to start looking at what's going to bring in more revenue to the city. And those houses bring in reliable revenue, and that revenue stream goes up, up, up over the years. So I'm going to leave my comments there. Gentlemen, you had some other comments down here?
Yep, I have a comment for you. I was really surprised the mayor is in favor of, I'm actually opposed to solar gardens throughout the residential area in Grant. I'm opposed that if you had your neighbor and it was right next to you, that'd be more offensive than having one or two along a state highway that could be adequately streamed. So Mr. Carr's statement is a little surprising that he'd rather have one, not one large farm, but them scattered throughout our whole rural area. I think that is a detriment to our city. So I would oppose the residential side of that. But that being said, and Mr. Huber just stated the reason we went to a 10-acre density was a sewer and water. And let's be quite honest, the reason the city of Grant went to a 10-acre density is because it was a recommendation of Met Council. And it was a recommendation of Met Council so that it would provide this large amounts of land to come in and redevelop later. You take a 40-acre parcel, buy 4 homes, and at the standard amount of meter, you could put 160 homes in there. It was Met Council that asked to go there. So we would be wise as we redraft our comprehensive plan to go like the city of Lakeland. They did move their density to a 2.5-acre density, which the city of Grant used to be, to prevent, absolutely stop Met Council in their tracks from coming into Lakeland. That recommendation for 10 acres was simply for Met Council to come back and use this after Lake Elmo and everything else has developed. So we, in drafting the new comprehensive plan, should considering going down to 2.5-acre parcels, maybe 5, whatever that number is, to stop Met Council dead in their tracks and keep this a rural area. That would get us to that probably 5,000 residency. You could get your local gas tax money back out of that, but you start putting homes on 2.5-acre parcels, and I'll guarantee you, Met Council is not going to be able to come up, buy up these nice new homes and bring in sewer and water. What is going to bring them in is when we allow the 3M dumping in a slurry pit out on the end of County Road 9.
We are talking about solar gardens right now. Save your comments. If you can't stay on track, I'll interrupt you. I'm sorry, but it's not professional.
Absolutely.
No, you're all done. You're all done.
So,
You're all done. You're all done.
I'm surprised when Tom talks about the comp.
All
He talked about the comp
All
plan.
done,
You had no
Larry.
problem, Jeff.
All done.
You are one arrogant SOB once again. I
We
will
know,
tell you.
we know. Enough with the name calling. Let's keep it professional. We'll stick on topic here. A couple of things. Larry said that he would oppose, number one, the residential installations. Keep in mind, people, if a residence wants to do one of these, they're fairly simple to limit. Most panels come in 100-watt increments, so they're 24 by 48, okay? So if you wanted to put in a full kilowatt, it's 10 panels, right? You got 1,000 watts, 10 100-watt panels, right? It's really not that much room. If you look at like a 24 by 48 panel and you get 10 of them on that wall, you're gonna cover maybe half that wall. It's not exactly obtrusive in your neighbors if it's properly setted, and that's what the COC would be for, to make sure that they are properly setted, they've got some screening, and they're not interrupting the neighbors' quiet enjoyment of their property. So we could certainly do something with that to make that a little more acceptable to even you, Mr. Lanou. Talk about shocked. Wow, am I shocked. Mr. Lanou just told us he would like us to bring us down to 2.5-acre lots. Interesting. DNR just lost a case with White Bear Lake, in which White Bear Lake and the DNR were on one side and the homeowners on the other. DNR has now been ordered by the judge to regulate all pumping within a 5-mile circle from White Bear Lake. We go down to 2.5-acre lots, and those with large acreages, yeah, sure, you're gonna be able to split your lot. Lauren's gonna be able to split his lot, but it's not gonna help the vast majority of residents in Grant to do that. In fact, what it's gonna do is bring more attention upon us. It's amazing how you change from one way to the other, Larry. I've never seen anything like it in terms of consistency. Tom, you're up.
Because you're not a forward thinker.
No, I know, Larry, you
Well,
certainly are.
I'd like to address Mr. Forward Thinker.
Yeah.
Because the easiest way to have the Met Council in here would be go down to 2.5-acre lots,
Exactly,
because why do we have larger lots is to accommodate our wells and our septics and have alternative spots to put them, because once we contaminate our ground and do not allow us to have well and septic, then we will have sewer and water.
Don't be talking
So
about
I think
contamination, you're off
Mr.
point
Forward
here.
Thinking is probably thinking about how to get sewer and water into Grant if he's making statements like that.
Exactly.
No, I'm actually saying if you look at,
Denny, go ahead.
at the
Larry,
city
you're
of
done.
Lakeland.
Larry, you don't get to talk 5 times before Denny gets to say one thing. I know you're important, Denny's
I thought he was
first.
there
Go
just to
ahead,
raise his
Denny.
hand.
Go ahead, Denny.
Thank you, I know I'm just a junior member.
Yep.
But I think if you went down to 2.5 acres here with the current septic system regs getting more and more and more stringent,
Yep.
you're not gonna have the Met Council blessing you. You're gonna have them bringing in sewer and water.
Larry is forward thinking to bring in sewer and water because it benefits Larry, in my opinion. But we'll stick on solar
You're
energy
ignorant,
here.
Jeff. I have no,
Yes,
you
thank
wanna know I
so
haven't.
much. Thank
You
you.
spent $40,000
Thank you.
coming after my legacy farm.
Thank you. Go
You
ahead,
know I have
Tom.
no intention of
Yes.
selling.
I would also address what the comp plan actually says about solar protection. So it doesn't say solar, it says solar access protection for residents. It doesn't say solar, it says access protection, which Mr. Lanou said he didn't want residents to have solar. I believe that was his comment. It says new subdivisions will be encouraged to accommodate the use of passive and active solar energy
Depends
systems.
on the size of the.
With special attention given to street lot and building orientation, little rules, solar access protection will be assured within the city's 5-acre minimum lot size and setback requirements. We are encouraging in our comp plan that was developed by the residents, developed by the council, developed by the planning commission, to allow residents to have solar.
Yeah.
And I encourage that, and I am for that. In fact, I am, and just like we did with other things, I'm encouraging that so much that I would recommend it, rather than going to 5-acre, I would say go smaller. However, that's gotta be regulated, because you can't have the same size solar array, and I'm not an expert on a smaller lot, I plead ignorance. But I think it should be allowed, because if anybody wants to do that, that's the new age. So, yeah, so I think that's in the comp plan, and Larry should probably read the comp plan, because it is what we are governed by. Not what Larry thinks, not what I think, not even what this council thinks, which is why people brought up a charter at one time, but what the comp plan says. This is the only thing that matters. So, I'm done.
Okay. Larry, can you make it quick? I was gonna
Yeah.
ask the applicant to come up.
Ashley, when you say that we're governed by the comp plan, Mr. Carr, you're absolutely wrong. There's not an enforceable document. Had it been passed as a charter, we could have made it a enforceable document. I know you campaign heavily against that, so once again, you're making false statements.
Well, the majority up here, I can reassure all of you, does consider it to be a governing document, and we will be following it to the detriment of Mr. Lanou. Sir, I did not remember your name, and if I could have you come up here and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, I bet we're gonna have some questions for you.
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor and council members, my name is David Watts. I'm a project developer on behalf of US Solar, who's the applicant in this case. We are strictly a community solar expert, so I'll try to keep my opinions about residential solar out of it. though I believe in both forms of solar when done correctly. First, community solar, and just to brief everyone, and a couple things that maybe didn't get mentioned in this setting, might have been discussed at the Planning Commission level. Community solar is just a program that allows for energy customers in one place to benefit from a solar project located nearby but somewhere else. There was a big flood of national and international companies back in 2014 when the legislation passed. In 2015, September, they put more restrictions on the program, and so that shrunk the competition down. Now you're just left with, basically for community solar at least, companies that are based in Minnesota, like US Solar, which is not such a bad thing. So we're a small local team, headquartered in Minneapolis, and we focus specifically on community solar markets, which is pretty much right now just Minnesota. Our projects, as compared to other projects, if you might drive around, they're short. They're typically 4 to 7 feet because we're using single axis trackers as opposed to what's called fixed tilt, which just points toward the south. Our single axis trackers rotate from east to west as the sun rises and sets, and so they're significantly shorter, about 9 feet shorter than the other technology that you'll see most often if you drive around. At full tilt of 60 degrees, the maximum height is 10 feet. They're screened from neighbors and public roadways. We plant pollinator-friendly and native grasses throughout the field. We use steel I-beam foundations as opposed to any type of concrete footings, which lessen the impervious surface and also the disturbance to soils. Residents have increased their income various ways across the state. Wind turbines, cell towers, but there was no mention of solar in the ordinance, so we brought it to the city. And I think, speaking on US Solar's behalf, the process working with the city staff and the Planning Commission has actually gone quite well. This community solar provides a way for residents to increase their income and diversify their income without damaging the rural character of the community, because there's no impact to visibility, traffic, noise, odor, all the things that make a good neighbor. Pollinator-friendly habitat and native grasses benefit the local environment as well as wildlife and nearby ag production. Community solar is an effective way to thwart further development and preserve agricultural land, which works just like a conservation program. The ordinance, as the Planning Commission notes state, I quote, would adequately protect the health, safety, and welfare of the community and would not negatively impact adjacent properties or neighborhoods. Lastly, cities, school districts, businesses, and residents can benefit from subscriptions available for this project. This means savings on your electricity bill for no upfront cost, and that's for both the city and its residents. I'd be happy to come back to the city council in the future, discuss the city subscription at length, but for now, we'll focus on the amendment. The proposed amendment was drafted by the staff with US Solar's help, and the Planning Commission recommended approval of the ordinance as written. I believe the diligence done here by the staff was extremely thorough on the community solar piece. Again, I'm not an expert on residential, so I won't weigh in there. And that included leveraging existing and successful ordinances from other municipalities across the state, excluding Scandia, which has a moratorium newly placed there. That does not inherently mean that they are banning solar forever. Typically it means that they're putting it in place so they can figure out how to adjust their ordinance or make a new ordinance, as we've seen in other counties. Some of the notable sections of the ordinance, which I'll just breeze through because I think Jennifer did a good job of summarizing it. The lot size of a minimum of 20 acres, increasing the lot size from 20 to 40. Again, as Jennifer mentioned, doesn't make a huge impact, but it would not impact our ability to do our project, so we'll stay neutral there. One item that was left out of that discussion about how many total projects could potentially work. There is also a half-mile buffer in the ordinance language, which would further limit the amount of sites. So if we were looking at 3 to 5 sites before, once you factor in the half-mile buffer, I'm sure some of those were adjacent because they're all kind of in those 2 corridors, you're probably down to just a couple sites, maybe 3. And on top of that, it also has to meet all of our other criteria criteria, which I can mention later. The 100-foot setback for any parcel lines that have adjacent homesteads. Any on-site wiring would be done underground up to the utility poles. Visual screening, there was a concern referenced in the Planning Commission report, which is actually solved by the current language regarding visual screening. All professional landscape plans are required to receive the Planning Commission's approval. Because we expect very few, maybe just one community solar garden in the city of Grant, we didn't want to lock the city into a one-size-fits-all approach. So now the power is within the city to ensure that, that the screening is appropriate and that they aren't ruining the rural character of the community. In reviewing the comp plan, we are actually consistent with the comp plan in many ways. The comp plan seeks to retain the rural lifestyle. Pollinator-friendly habitat greatly improves agricultural yields of surrounding properties, and that pollinator-friendly habitat blends in with the area, as do the plants that we use in our landscape screening plans. You won't see it, hear it, smell it. We don't use pesticide. We're not requiring public services or water or sewage. Mr. Tom Carr alluded to Comp Plan Goal 2 in a letter that was submitted, which we would actually help achieve, preserving and protecting ag land. In this case, we're taking 10 acres of an 80-acre farm, which will be used for community solar. And even on those 10 acres, only 0.4 acres of that are impervious surface. The rest is pollinator-friendly habitat. This increased income then allows the landowner to keep the remaining acreage in farmland. Mr. Carr also highlighted the visual rural character, which we will help maintain thanks to our short systems and our small systems and through thorough landscaping, screening, and native grasses. And of course, the 10 acres of farmland that we're preserving, there's no further development on that would thwart it's essentially like a conservation program, which keeps those 10 acres perfectly viable for ag at the end of the project's life. In the introduction of the comp plan, it's noticed that, and I'll quote here, because I think this is a pretty important section, given the desire of most Grant residents to preserve the rural character and the possibility that most of the remaining agricultural land could be lost to residential uses within the time frame of this comprehensive plan, it is paramount that the issue of defining and preserving rural character be given serious and creative attention by the leaders of Grant. This actually is not a commercial or an industrial use, so respectfully, I will totally disagree with that. There's no storefront, no permanent structures, no noise, no lights, no billboards, no city utilities, no traffic, no offices, no shopping malls or service stations or restaurants. We're helping the city prioritize agricultural land over residential and other development. We're much more like farming instead, except we cultivate the sun, and what we produce is measured in kilowatt hours. This is a simple way to preserve ag land for the long term, in stark contrast to residential development. We agree with the Planning Commission that the proposed text amendment was consistent with the comp plan, which is why they recommended approval to the City Council. Briefly, I'll mention our justification for why we believe this is a good idea for the City of Grant. It does maintain the rural character because it's small, not visible, and minimizes that impact. The landowners that are participating are then less inclined to rezone, subdivide, or sell land for other types of development, including residential. Like a conservation easement, it thwarts the industrial, commercial, or residential development. So in 30 years, whenever this project is removed, the ag land is very viable. It hasn't been churned up or been using pesticides. There will be very, very few, and again, perhaps just one, I don't know. We believe that there are very few sites that meet the qualifications. The main ones to keep in mind, besides all the stuff that we've talked about inside the ordinance, are not just the three-phase distribution line that's been brought up, but also the substation capacity and also the feeder line capacity. So these are two limiting factors totally outside of the control of anyone in this room, which would limit the amount of projects. So even if you did have 3 sites, it's possible that after the first site, Xcel Energy comes back and says there's no more room. The staff's analysis shows approximately 3 to 5 sites here. With that half-mile buffer, again, it's limited even further. And we did reach out to every suitable site in the city. Only one of them led to a viable project. Luckily, that is on a Century farm owned by Joyce Wielander, and her site is terrific, and it makes it easy to integrate with this community seamlessly. We precisely fit the zoning classification of this land because the remainder of the property will be preserved for, and I quote, agricultural and commercial food production. Similar to other conditional uses like horseboarding and training or supper clubs or whatever, we must meet specific performance standards which additionally reinforce the city's initiatives and their ordinances. Again, there are no requirements of public services like police or fire, very little traffic. Community solar gardens do not harm adjacent property values, as has been verified in several studies, one of which, just to mention on record, is Kirkland Appraisals LLC, which studied this across 9 different states and concluded no impact, either positive or negative. Community solar gardens are not permanent, so again, when it reaches the end, the decommissioning is very simple because we're using just steel I-beams as the foundations, and without any pesticides or tilling of the land for 30 years, it's in great condition with very little soil disturbance. A big piece here is that community solar benefits the environment, not just the global environment, but the local environment. There are no hazardous materials involved, which is something I think everyone in this room can celebrate. The steel I-beam foundations used in our design, again, accounts for only 0.4 acres of impervious surface, with the rest being pollinator-friendly habitat and native grasses. That wild pollinator-friendly habitat benefits ag production by doubling the proportion of flowers that develop into mature fruits or seeds. In fact, a study documented a 5% productivity increase to surrounding soy fields. This vegetation also reduces stormwater runoff by 23% for the 2-year storm and by 8% for the 100-year storm. And of course, the obvious that we are using an inexhaustible resource, the sun, to produce clean energy here in Minnesota. In conclusion, we believe that the proposed amendments allow the city 1 or more community solar gardens that will strictly maintain the rural character while benefiting the tax-paying landowner, the environment, and the community. We received the Planning Commission's recommendation of approval, and now we respectfully request that the City Council approve our request as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, yeah. That was a good presentation. We're gonna ask you some questions here. I've got a number, and we'll let the council go first. Tom, I believe you were first.
Well, you go ahead if you want to.
I've got an awful lot of questions.
So do I. So I'll just go through it since you addressed some of the stuff that I brought forward on the comp plan. I'm sorry I smiled a little bit when you said all the projects like gas stations and all the things that it is not, and we don't allow any of those either. So we pretty much don't allow any of that stuff. So we kind of like smells like hay and horses and corn. This doesn't smell, but it doesn't smell like that either.
Well, it smells like pollinator-friendly habitat, with all due respect.
Okay. You talked about screening. You talked about, putting up native grasses, et cetera. These can be like 10 feet high.
Screening, yes.
So how high are the panels up from the ground?
The maximum height of our systems is 10 feet, only if it's at full tilt. More throughout the day, it's 4 to 7 feet.
4 to 7 feet, and these grasses are?
The grasses are what's within the project.
Yeah.
The grass is about 2.5 feet.
Okay,
The landscape screening, typically we use Techni arborvitae or cardinal dogwood or a mix, sometimes Black Hill spruce, so it kind of depends, but our typical plans would involve Techni arborvitae, which is a mature height of 12 to 15 feet.
Okay, and historically, you wouldn't know this, but historically in Grand, we've had lots of screening issues on CUPs that we've given out.
Okay.
And still do. So it's a constant problem for us and complaints from neighbors to get things screened. Trees die, they don't get replaced, things happen. So that's just been a problem. That doesn't really reflect on you.
Sure.
Scandia was actually a full repeal. It's not a moratorium. The actual language is repealing that section of the ordinance. So if you didn't know that. They've also had issues where these solar power plants go in and they basically, they're doing it for somebody like Joyce, wants to get some resident, some income off the property without selling it. But then they sold the land to the solar developer. So that happened in Scandia. It happened once. So I don't know how we would stop that from happening. And then Pardon me?
Sorry, what's the concern specifically, that we would
Well,
buy the
that
property?
If the intent of this is to help farmers keep their land,
Yeah,
or anybody, which is true, and that's why, and you've got Joyce here, but you said you asked a whole bunch of people and you only got one?
yeah, well, in some cases we do, I mean, we pretty much approach people and ask for a lease, because that's mostly what the landowners want.
Sure.
We do offer purchase options.
Right.
In this case, it's not what Joyce wanted, it's not what we want,
Right.
we're not
But-
in the business of owning properties.
No, and that's great, but you say you went around and asked some of these other properties and they all turned you down?
We sent letters to, yeah, all the sites that we found as
So
suitable.
the sites that you found, nobody wanted it? But I'm just summarizing, but I mean, that would be a correct statement. Nobody wanted your,
Either the
Right.
project, like the actual land, turned out to not be suitable, or they didn't want it, except
didn't
for
want
this unique case.
got it, okay, I just want to make sure I said. And then we talk about the value of properties not going down. I'm sorry, maybe, I don't know what communities they studied, and that's subjective, but I can guarantee you here in Grant, the property value would go down if that was next to you. I can guarantee you, because in Grant particularly, because of our high property values, our uniqueness of our metro, we're 20 minutes from St. Paul, we're kind of unique that way. And I think it definitely would impact. I know it would for people that I would know that would want to move to Grant. No disrespect. I mean, I'm not disrespecting the study, but I haven't seen the study. We talked about the study, but I would have to,
Right.
I'd have to look at that. But
And
those are my comments and questions, so.
Right, and that, although you use the word guarantee, respectfully, it's a subjective opinion. This is a study that used more data than any other study in the country.
But I know Grant.
Uh-huh.
That's
Yeah.
all. Yeah.
Yeah, and each community is different, and so it's hard for me to prove something in
Exactly.
Grant. I acknowledge that.
Yep.
As a sort of a secondary, just a note here on property values. When we went to do this in Benton County, Benton County, the staff went to the Benton County appraiser, without our prompting, and asked them for their opinion. They basically said the same thing, that there's been no data to show that property values would decrease, and his assessment, which is not my own, was that perhaps the surrounding values would actually increase if the property owners who are having a solar lease actually got paid those high lease rates or the high purchase rates, which would reflect on the market going up.
Yeah, there's all kinds of reasons property value. You're next to a freeway, is the assessor gonna say that's gonna lower your property value? No. You're next to train tracks? No. So assessors say all kinds of things, but anyway, I respectfully disagree with that, but that's okay, I'm done.
Okay. Number of questions for you here.
Yes, sir.
Try to start just as quick as I can, if I can sort of make this efficient. What is the lease length you're proposing here? Is that 30 years?
The length of our lease with the landowner
Right.
is a 25-year lease, but
25.
we do have some built-in extension options on
Okay.
the lease.
So, but you've talked several times, and I've read your material here, and it sounds as though U.S. Solar normally removes these installations at a 30-year time frame. Is that correct?
No, that's not
It's not.
necessarily true. I did reference that, so I'm not saying your
Yep.
assessment's wrong, but no, our projects, I mean, it could go for 25 years, and that's how long the XL Energy contract is.
Okay.
That's also the length of our revenue contracts, which are our subscriptions, as well as basically everything is lined up there.
Okay.
But we can get extensions on those if XL permits, and so that's where, it could go 40 years on the same equipment. If we're looking at the production projections, it would still be viable 25, 40 years from now.
Perfect. Okay, well, let's call it 25 years so that we have our numbers straight, because I saw that 30 and I wanted to make sure I had that right. So, how long until a normal panel, I assume you're most likely using Chinese-built panels, how long until that normal panel reaches an 80% efficiency?
25 years, that's the exact warranty, is that worst case scenario in year 25 is producing a minimum of 80%,
A minimum of 80% at 25 years
Yes.
of age.
which for energy production, that's actually quite good.
You mind if I throw a codicil in there, sir?
Yeah, you can interrupt me for a second. I have some more questions, but go ahead.
Yeah, just for a second. Is that life cycle true even in Minnesota? I mean, with snow load and below zero and 95 and...
The warranty holds up. I mean, luckily it's not just someone's projection, it's an actual warranty, so we know the panels will be producing that.
Okay, good enough. U.S. Solar, I believe I saw somewhere that you guys are in handling the Sartell installation up there along 94. Is that correct? Is that you guys?
That was a joint venture U.S. Solar and a larger corporation out of Canada.
Okay.
They were the managing partner of that, but yeah, we did have some role in that project.
Do you know the size of that project?
Sartell, I want to say that's we have one in Sartell, one in Sauk Rapids. I get them confused. That might be a 5 megawatt or it's a 3 megawatt. I'm having trouble recalling.
It's massive. It's right on the exit to St. John's University, and it is truly massive.
A lot of them are.
Yeah.
You drive around and see the stuff that's in construction. That's all the stuff that came before the new restrictions of the program.
Right. Hey, where's refresh my my geography for a moment here. Where's Benton County?
Benton County,
Yeah.
it's up in the St. Cloud area. It's adjacent to, like, just slightly to the east of the city of St. Cloud. You hit Benton
Okay.
County.
So we're talking about the Sartell installation then when you talk about Benton County and the assessor up there, because there's only one up there that I'm aware of.
That's the project that's in construction. We just got 2 interim use permits in Benton County for 2 1 megawatt projects.
So we're 2 additional projects.
2 additional 1 megawatt projects in Benton County within the last month.
Okay. Let's talk tax treatment for a second. So the owner gets some benefits in terms of getting an income out of a portion of the property that I would assume is greater than crop income. I think that would be
Correct.
fair, otherwise they wouldn't do it. So I'm sure you know the tax implications of that. So the rest of the property then stays in an agricultural tax status, and only as I understand, the portion used for the panels then reverts to what type of a tax status? Because I didn't see that anywhere in here.
The portion of the field, which would be 10 acres in this case, goes from an agricultural millage rate to a commercial millage rate.
A commercial millage rate.
I'm not sure exactly what the differences are in the city.
Sure, no, that's just what I want to know. I figured you had that information at your fingertips, so I wanted to ask. Read a couple of things lately, and here's what I'm just going to lay this out for everyone. The government's thinking about charging tariffs to the Chinese manufacturers that are bringing these in, and really what makes your business model from a businessman, what really makes your business model hum from an outsider is the cost of the panels that you're buying. And without the lower cost of the Chinese panels, if you had to go to strictly American manufacturers with environmental standards to actually build these things, with the horrendously dirty chemicals that are actually used to produce them, the heavy metals and such, it would be very difficult for this to turn a profit, and certainly impossible for it to turn a profit without the federal subsidies that you have now. How do you think, and this is a hypothetical, and I realize you're a representative from a large company, so I'm going to throw this out there and see if you can answer it. If the federal subsidies were to disappear tomorrow because we keep having changes in our federal government, and it's quite radical changes from one side of the spectrum to the other side of the spectrum, no matter how you lie. But those changes are going to affect the subsidies that the federal government can both afford to pay your company and others like it. And once those subsidies go down, all of a sudden your 25-year lease may not look quite so attractive. Has your company thought about the lack of subsidy if that were to occur, and what would be the company's plan to offset that cost?
Yeah, so a few items in there. Don't let me walk away without answering them all.
Sure.
First, about the heavy metals and all that. It's possible you're referring to, there's sort of 2 branches of solar panels. What we're using is photovoltaic with silicon.
Okay.
So there's no hazardous materials involved in
In their production?
the
Really?
production or in the panels themselves. I believe.
Well, the panels themselves are, and I'm talking about the production of them.
Sure, and I think where that might have come from is with cadmium solar panels, which are, I think the closest place that's used is maybe Nevada.
Yeah, that's sort of older school, isn't it, or different technology?
You can perhaps get a better production from it, and maybe it's cheaper, but pretty much everywhere it's not allowed.
Okay. All right.
And so here we're using silicon.
Good enough.
So number 2 was regarding the tariff, which is currently unresolved. Just to brief everyone, it would increase the cost of importing panels that were produced outside of the U.S., even if owned by a U.S. company, which is the case of most manufacturers. So that, yes, would increase our cost, not to a point where this would be beyond reasonable. So we'd probably be more selective in which sites we choose to develop, and make sure that we're choosing ones that are very low cost to develop. But no, we U.S. Solar have done a lot of analysis on it, and we plan to remain here in Minnesota as long as there's a program to do so. even if the tariff is passed as proposed. And that also leads into I think the third and final point about the
Federal subsidies.
the federal subsidies, thank you. The investment tax credit. So we receive an investment tax credit of 30% of our development cost after it's built. We get the tax credit back on that. That was actually lengthened beyond its original term in a Republican-led Congress. So as it stands, we don't have any reason to believe that the current politics of our government are going to pull it out from under the rug. If it does, that would have a pretty significant impact on our company, every other company. And the same could be said about not just all energy generation, which also receives subsidies, but also everything else that receives subsidies, farming, for example. Certain aspects of our lives revolve around subsidies, and that's just the way that the government has found itself. I won't support it or oppose it, but we've done a lot of analysis on the what ifs, and our company is committed to being in Minnesota and not just being here right now, but our entire business model is to own and operate and maintain these things for their entire lifespan, as opposed to some of the project development companies whose entire business model is to flip it to, Berkshire Hathaway or someone else to just add it to their spreadsheet of a number of projects that they're owning.
I think we know why Berkshire Hathaway is buying stuff like this. There's a huge tax advantage to it. So to be very honest with you, David.
Well, the tax advantage is only realized at the point of development. There's no ongoing subsidy or tax advantage.
Nothing? Not through the state, not through Excel, not through energy costs they don't pay a premium on those energy costs when you feed into the grid. There's not a premium paid back to you?
The
At
only
all.
subsidy we ever receive or anticipate, at least as it stands right now, is the investment tax credit.
Okay, real good, thanks. Just one other question. I haven't seen a copy of that lease. It would have been nice to see a copy of that lease, and I'm not sure whether or not, I'm gonna ask the attorney whether or not that's a private document. It would have been nice to at least see some of the language in there and some of the conditions in there. I think that would have been helpful. But again, that's probably a private document, so I might be stepping outside of my purview here. I'm gonna go to the clerk real quick.
Mr. Mayor, council members, that's not necessarily a private document. That would be part of an application for a CUP.
Oh, it would. Okay, well, thank you, Kim. Yeah, that's great information.
Mr.
hang on.
Huber, if I
Yep,
may?
please, go ahead, yep.
The lease itself, there's both the lease and the memorandum.
Okay.
The memorandum is the portion that's a public document, and that's typically what's attached to use permits.
Okay.
We would be more than happy to supply that with you.
Sure. What does the memorandum spell out, just so that I could, if it came to it, what would I expect to see in that?
It's all the basic terms of the agreement. It just leaves out things like the lease rate or, other private matters. I suppose.
Private financial matters between you and the landowner.
Correct.
Okay, real good. Gentlemen, we haven't seen hands. Nothing? Lauren?
No, I think,
Nothing?
I'm
Okay.
satisfied. You did an excellent job of answering all the questions.
Well, I would,
you, sir.
I would definitely agree. Tom?
I just kind of have a wrap up for everything that I've said tonight. I mean, I think if there was a hue and cry for this, and I think then I would look at it, because as you said, it's possible to screen, possible, I've heard that a lot, but sure. I don't see the mandate for this for a few spots, apparently, right now anyway, and it could change, things change. The fact that our comp plan says rural character, a lot of visual in there, I mean, there's constant references to agricultural and those kind of things, and I don't view this as agricultural. I'm sorry if we call it a garden or a farm, it's not, in my opinion. So, I mean, it's not that I dislike the actual, I just don't think it fits Grant. And it's certainly not in a comp plan. And if we were to go forward with something like this, I think the citizens have a right to talk about this, rather than have us up here, in my opinion, because everybody's got an opinion, that's okay. But in my opinion, I think the comp plan, I don't think it suits this, and I don't think it says we're not supposed to do this, in my opinion. But if we were to decide at some point to do it, then I think the residents would have a right to do that, and I think it should reflect in our comp plan. Because the comp plan is also approved by the people around us, the other communities, who appreciate us for what we are, which is rural, large acreages, and just open areas, not banks of solar panels. No offense, it's your business, I get it. And I think in the right situation, it's a good product. In the right areas, it's a good product. But I think for us, I just don't see it. And if it were something that we went forward with and the council decides to do it, I would encourage us to say, okay, let the residents have more input than us passing a text amendment tonight. So
Yeah.
that's what I would do.
May I respond quickly to just one of the points which had to do with, and I think you alluded to this earlier about the public, not necessarily being that interested in this. And I think that, because we sent out some letters and not all of those people took us up on our offer to lease their specific land to do this project, that doesn't mean that the folks wouldn't want to get involved. And I hope the city too would get involved and take advantage of the subscription, which is essentially just free money for supporting renewable energy. It's no upfront cost, and residents would save something like 15% on their XL Energy bills. It could be even higher for a city because it's a larger customer. And so I would encourage the city to think about not just the benefits for the city economically and the residents economically or the tax-paying landowner, but also the benefits to the local environment and the global environment.
No, I appreciate that, and you had no response, that's true, okay, but I had no response either. I didn't have anybody calling me, telling me,
Yeah.
I really want this. I'm just saying, I didn't, so, at this time.
David, I'm going to stop you there for a second. That was interesting. Did you have your hand up? Yeah. Larry's next here, but it was interesting. You just spoke for just a brief moment on a subscription service, I believe you called it, for citizens and residents. You talked for quite some time in your explanatory text during the beginning of your remarks, and I don't remember you talking about this. Could you expand on this, please?
Yep, yeah, I kind of just touched on it a little bit.
Okay, I don't remember.
No, that's all right. So essentially, the subscription just gets at the nature of this entire program, which is for offsite energy customers to benefit from solar projects. So we find ideal sites and develop them, whether it's just one in this case that we have right now, or if there are, across the state, there are many, obviously. And residents in the area, at least for this community solar garden, US Solar is opening up subscriptions, but more generally, typically our customers are public entities. So some of our customers, just to list a few, would be the Watertown Mayor School District, Becker Public Schools. We've got City of Annandale, City of St. Cloud, folks like that. University of Minnesota, and so it's usually larger public entities. But for this project, because it's not directly adjacent to Hennepin, we figured that there's actually a lot more residential demand for these subscriptions rather than commercial.
Okay.
Not that Hennepin doesn't have residential demand, but when you're in Hennepin, you have all these commercial and public demand. So we're sort of opening it up to residents, which all it looks like is you sign a subscription agreement, you don't pay an upfront cost, you start receiving a bill credit from XL Energy, which is because you're subscribing to this. Your bill credit, let's just say, for example's sake, they're giving you 12 cents for every kilowatt hour, and then to US Solar, you're paying 10 cents every kilowatt hour to subscribe. So the 2 cent savings in this one example is just savings on your electricity bill.
Sure.
At no upfront cost.
Yep, here's the problem with that, and here's my concern with that. There's no way that US Solar can define and/or send its power to individual subscription servicers, individual homes, individual entities, the university, anybody else. You're feeding directly into the grid.
Correct.
You're not stripping out your electrons from XL's electrons they made burning cold down in Stillwater. So in other words, what's happening here is another subsidy of, what'd you say it was, 12 cents a kilowatt from XL, and then they pay you guys 10 cents, right?
No, not exactly. So the bill credit is just,
It's a bill credit.
yeah, so what that's made of is just the average rate of XL plus 2 cents, which XL is putting on top because it's a renewable product.
Okay.
And that goes on your XL Energy bill. Then the subscriber pays US Solar to receive that bill credit.
Gotcha. Larry, you had a question?
Yeah, I agree with Councilman Carr over here. Just a minute ago, he said if we're going to write this in here, we should be allowing the citizens of Grant to work with us on the comprehensive plan. But last month, ironically, when we made a motion for the citizens of Grant to put together a steering committee, these three voted against the citizens to be allowed to write and draft our comprehensive plan. So I find it very ironic that he would say that he would want the citizens involved. And in fact, last month they very well spoke against that. So I I encourage people to get involved in the writing of the comprehensive plan, and let's meet as a private group. If our city will not allow the citizens to form a steering committee like many do, then let's let the citizens put together and start drafting one and bring it to the council. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Larry. Denny, anything else?
You know, all of my questions have been answered.
Okay, I want to ask a couple of procedural questions for staff, if it's okay, and I'm not sure who on the staff is going to answer this. If, for example, and I don't know how this is going to work, so this might sound a bit ignorant, Kim, we've got one ordinance amending the Grand Code of Ordinances, but we've got both solar gardens, the commercial aspect on 20 acres, and then we've combined this with the residential and household amendment as well. If the council needs to make, in my mind, needs to make two different decisions here, one on the solar and one on the household. We can't, I can't, do you see what I'm saying? We have two different votes here and it's sitting in the same amendment. Am I not making sense here?
I'm gonna defer to the city planner on that.
Could I?
Okay, and why don't you go ahead and jump in and maybe
Well,
you can define it better than
Yeah,
I.
I think it depends on what we want to do. I mean, I have a few tweaks to the residential that I'd like to see happen. I don't think I'm keen on the, the solar power plants, but, I mean, I think we could definitely go through, amend this, and then I would suggest we just do that, make our changes, and then make a motion with the revised ordinance, if that sounds okay. Kim's nodding her head, so
Yeah.
with that, I could make a few suggestions that I have written down, if that's okay.
Well, jump into it. As long as Kim, as long as that's okay, we go ahead and make a motion with the changes.
Kevin had his hand up too.
Oh, Kevin, go ahead, please.
My suggestion would be if the council feels like you need to consider these things separately, there's perhaps one of two ways to do that. Either a motion could be made, for example, that says strike out all of section 32.458 regarding community solar energy systems and delete those items, for example, if you wanted to remove that aspect of it. Or the perhaps cleaner way to deal with it would be to table the matter and have it brought back next month and divide it out into two separate ordinances so that it's more clear in terms of what the council's doing with the ultimate ordinance.
Yeah, Larry?
Yeah. At this time, I'd like to amend the motion I made to approve the solar resolution, that text amendment that we're changing, to delete the residential portion and only look at the larger solar gardens in Grant, which is what you were here, and we have the applicant that's come forward to us. So at this time, I'd like to amend my motion to only address the larger solar gardens in Grant at this time.
I second that.
So,
Do you have a motion on the floor?
yeah, you had
Yes,
one.
I
Yeah,
have a
did.
motion on the floor, and I'm
I
amending it.
started right along. Kevin, so is that what you meant by splitting this? Because frankly, and just the reason I asked him is the residential needs more work. I'm not happy where that residential sits. It doesn't sound like some of the other members are happy where that residential sits as well. So has Larry's motion encapsulated what you talked about in terms of splitting these two?
I believe it does, so the understanding would be from me on Mr. Lanew's motion would be to strike out sections 32-457 in their entirety, and I assume also then Mr. Lanew striking out the portions of the chart relating to residential solar systems and the definitions relating to residential.
Gentlemen,
solar
before we go further on that, I'm going to turn to the planner. I think she's wants to have a say here on how we would do this. This was just a little confusing the way these two were put together like this. It would have been nice if there were two different amendments. So sorry if there was confusion on my part.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I respectfully disagree. I feel like we're doing that a lot tonight.
Okay.
The intent of the way it was drafted was to create its own division within the ordinance that would address solar development that encapsulated different types of users.
Okay.
So the reasoning behind it is so that when you look at, for instance, section 32-455 definitions, all of those definitions then apply to how they're used within Division 5. So everything is kind of intertwined. Now, so from my perspective, it makes sense that you would include all of it together in terms of how you look at it. However, if there's discomfort with the way this is intertwined because you want to have discussions that are separate, I guess my recommendation would be to bring back two separate ordinances that one of them is going to be the residential based and one is going to be the community based. That's not how this was drafted, so it's going back and basically redrafting these so that they're separate. But to me, if we just simply strike things, I think we have a bigger potential to have inconsistencies and errors because this was drafted from the perspective of comprehensively looking at it. So I guess my recommendation would be let's then separate them and bring back two separate
Well,
ordinances.
and here's the problem. Let me just cut to the nub of the matter here. How does one vote take in both uses? It doesn't. I can't, I mean, Larry's original motion was to approve the solar gardens. Well, if his original motion was to approve the solar gardens and it's all encapsulated in there, how did we talk about the residential and either approve or disapprove of that usage? I don't understand that. So Jennifer, I'm leaning toward splitting this out, allowing Mr. Luna to go ahead and make that motion the way that he stated it, to split out the residential and just go ahead and have a vote on the solar gardens as stated, the community solar gardens. Kevin, is that your understanding? Do you both agree that we can split
No,
that out?
but
Hang on a second.
Mr.
Let's
Mayor,
talk to
members of
staff
the
here.
council, what I'm saying is that the way this is drafted is that they're intertwined. Because that's how it went through the planning commission, because the planning commission reviewed it. The moratorium related to both residential and commercial installations. Therefore, the drafted ordinance link, because solar energy, whether it's a community solar garden or somebody's installation on their rooftop, the process is essentially the same. The power or what's being generated is being sold back to the grid. So the way this was drafted was to accommodate both of it. So from my perspective, you have to like create two very separate, not just like delete sections. I think we run the error of not being able to cross-reference the sections and missing something if you vote on it tonight. So that's my recommendation. You don't
And
have
I
to-
would agree. I don't like the way it was put together. Tom?
Well, my question is, are you saying, Jennifer, you don't want us to go through and do some minor tweaks and,
On the household.
well, no, on both? Here's what I suggested, community solar, energy systems, and instead of having a C for A1, A2, have an N, not allowed. Okay, on section, building mounted, I just think instead of saying more than 5 feet above the roof line, just say maximum of 35 feet. You can't be over 35 feet. And as far as like the setbacks, it was brought up earlier, just change it to
All right.
define that, you know, what acreage we want. Is it 1 acre, 2 acres, to allow more people to have them? And then we do have, I believe, setbacks, because we had this issue with people building on smaller lots. We adjusted our setbacks to allow, the setbacks are smaller, less on smaller lots, I do believe. So if we said basically that we just set the amount of the acreage on a lot, which could be an acre or 5, this would be under section ground-mounted C. We go like I'd say 1 acre, but if you want to go 2, I mean, there are some 1 acre lots in Grant, but if you want to say 2, and then I would say under the setbacks, say that they would meet our current residential setbacks for smaller, you know, for all lots, which some lots are smaller, that's already addressed in the ordinance. We don't have to go and revisit that. You know, and you could even say leave the 100 acres for lots, 100 feet from lot lines for lots over 10 acres, and then all others to adhere to the city setbacks and be done. And then we could pass this, and it would be over.
Mayor,
If everybody passed it or not passed it.
Yeah, good one.
could I call the question?
Hang on a second, we're still kind of discussing how to do the question here, Lauren. I understand what you're saying about splitting it, but it sounds as though, you know, Tom has made a good point here, and I'm wondering if you gentlemen will consider it. And all I was asking, I was obviously not being, I was having one of my brain moments here. All I was asking was how to handle the vote in order to approve one and not approve the other. And Tom just cut right to the nub of the matter, which was NN, and then just go through and make some tweaks to the other one. Thank you, Tom. Experience talking over here.
Well, I just think it would be easier and we could wrap. Now, I defer to Jennifer if she thinks that's a bad idea. Still, I asked the question.
Well,
Personally, I mean,
Yeah,
if you're
Kevin.
gonna not permit community solar gardens in any in any of your zones, then it doesn't make sense to have any of the language in your ordinance about
kind of my
the
point.
regulations that go along with that. I guess,
I respectfully disagree, because if you're not gonna have something, you need to know what that is. We've ran through that a lot of times before. We had no definition,
We did
so.
have
well, it's
definitions.
not just the definition, you have got performance standards in there for community solar gardens, but you're otherwise permitting them. But I guess, my preferred, best case scenario for this would just be to table all this and bring it back, because I think it needs, based upon the discussion from council, I feel like it needs a lot of work, and I don't feel like we're in a good position to approve it tonight without having a redraft that really shows us a clean version without just oral discussion of it. But more importantly, what I think would be preferable would be direction from the council, not necessarily a formal vote, but direction. Does a majority of the council want community solar gardens or not? And does a majority of the council want residential systems or not? And then with that direction, staff can go back and rework the overall ordinance, because I tend to agree with Jennifer that, if you're going to allow either or both, it makes more sense to have them all in one comprehensive set of ordinances if you're gonna have both. Because you're gonna have similar definitions, the definitions kind of play off each other, and the terms play off each other, so if you're gonna approve both, you want them all in one set of code. But first, staff needs to know if a majority of the council wants both of these aspects of these systems.
Well, exactly, and I think my point would be that I think the applicant deserves to know who we want.
Yeah, well, we can poll the council on that, and like Kevin says, we can give the staff direction on that. Larry had a comment.
Yeah, I'd like to call the question. We have a motion and amendment on the floor that's been seconded. Have the vote on it, and then after that motion is then been determined, then you can determine whether you want to separate the two, if you want to move forward. But I think we call the question that's on the floor. It's here.
Well, I mean, I ask you whether or not you think it's wise, I'll just run it by you, whether or not you think it's wise to have that vote here without splitting these out, letting the staff know, you know, what
The
the.
idea is to split it out, and the amendment was to only
Okay,
allow
real
the
good. We're gonna go
community
ahead,
garden.
go ahead and
Call the
restate your
question.
motion. Restate your motion so we have it,
The
please.
motion is to approve the community solar gardens. The original one was to approve the documentation and the work that the planning commission approved. So right now, I'm simply asking to separate only the community side of this and vote on that issue, because it seems to me that they're a lot of concern on the residential side. We only have one or two sites. Let's just move forward, just call the question, we'll know where you stand. You'll have a better feeling for this going forward. And maybe win, lose, or draw, we can come back and redraft it as directed after. But we have a question on the floor, or a motion on the floor, it simply should be called.
Yeah, nope, I understand, Larry, but we're gathering a lot of evidence here, and we're gathering a lot of procedural advice here, so your motion and your second are not gonna go to waste here, we're going to be voting on it, but right now we're trying to pull together our procedural ducks, as it were. Kim?
Mr. Mayor, council members, just for clarification from Councilmember Lanu, my understanding is that the motion is to approve the draft ordinance with the striking of the residential, the two areas of residential, solar, the building mount and the roof mount. Is that correct?
Yes, all the references to residential solar equipment.
Okay, I just wanted that
So
clarified.
we're just separating
So it's approved.
residential and community. We're separating the two clearly. We're having a vote on one issue right now tonight. We can come back and clean up the residential at a later date.
Yeah, yeah, I would, yeah.
That simple.
I'm
needs
not gonna
more
read
work.
that. I'm not sure what you want me to.
No, I
do.
can read it. In a 1978 amendment to the Metropolitan Land Planning Act required all local governments in metropolitan areas to include an element for protection and development of access to direct sunlight for solar energy systems in their comprehensive plans. We've done that for residential, but Larry's asking us to just pull that out of the comp plan. That's what he's asking with his motion, so.
Yeah, well, you know what, after we take this, Larry has a first and a second now, we need to respect that, we need to vote on that. So we're gonna do that, and then we're gonna go ahead, per Kevin's suggestion, we're going to consult with staff and let them know in terms of the other aspect that's been cut from this motion, whether or not we want the staff to move forward on that. Danny?
Your question though, if we vote on this as it is, are we not eliminating residential solar?
Yes. Well, Larry's motion, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I'm not, we're not eliminating it.
Sure
We're
you
gonna
are.
come back and we're gonna discuss it later at a further date.
No, you're eliminating it.
Well, I'm eliminating at this point, if that's the way you wanna read it. I say we're gonna come back and we're gonna clean up the language and gonna revisit it. We're just simply gonna either approve or disapprove of a community solar garden.
I think we're just separating it out so we have a standalone, one for residential and one for solar gardens. This specifically addresses
Does not
each,
exclude the other one. You
Kim?
can come back next month and revisit it.
Staff doesn't wanna do that.
Just, again, for clarification, my understanding with the motion and the second, if that were to pass, this draft ordinance would be approved with the elimination of the residential portions. If that motion were to approve. The council can, at that point, if you would like, direct staff to bring back a residential ordinance. Or you can leave it at that. This would be approved as the motion was made.
Yes.
But we can direct staff to, if the council wants to take a look at residential, we can go ahead and direct staff to bring that back to us next month, okay? With all due respect, tying these two together because they both pump power into a grid is a very difficult way, I think, to put this together in terms of, they're completely separate issues from my perspective, and I still don't quite get why they were tied together like this, because both panels, collect sunlight and make electricity. How they were tied together like that just escapes me, and I am still not comfortable with how that was tied together. Perhaps you could school me. I did have a couple of emails and I didn't talk to anybody on this one, so I've been confused about it for a while. Kevin, is that understanding of what the clerk just said, is that your understanding legally?
It is. Certainly you have a right to come back and pass another ordinance next month or any other month relating to residential systems.
Great. So if the majority of the council passes this right now, it would approve solar gardens, and because the residential have been struck, it would then bring down residential solar gardens in this vote. If the majority of the council were to say no, we could, if the majority of the council says no, the residential ones are struck as well anyway.
Well, the moratorium just remains in place and we
Moratorium remains in place and we go from there. Okay.
continue to work on the matter.
Tom?
I have one question. If this is not like a CUP application, but is there any restrictions or time limits on us voting on this?
We're in a moratorium.
So there's no,
Well, the moratorium has a life,
Yeah.
so you have to study it and make a determination and make a determination
right,
within the time frame of the moratorium, which I believe is 12 months.
not
Someone
the
can
text
correct me if
amendment
I'm-
though, okay.
No, the text amendment is part of the moratorium, because you've requested per the moratorium that we study the issue and determine how it's addressed within the ordinance. Kevin can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but the point of the moratorium is to study whether or not we need to put it in our ordinance or not.
No, I understand that, but with the CUP, we have the 60-day rule and
You
application.
would for a text amendment also if there
That's
was,
what I'm asking. Is
if
this
there
a
was
pod-
no moratorium. The
Okay, you
moratorium,
answered my question. So since there's a moratorium, that's a moot point, is what
Correct.
you're the answer. Okay,
Thank you.
okay,
No time limit.
okay. So.
there is a time limit. It's 12 months and it's the moratorium.
12 months, we have plenty of time. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call the vote as Larry has stated it. I don't think we have any other choice with it sitting on the floor like this. All those in favor of, and I'll state this for you, Larry, approving solar gardens in Grant, amendment to chapter 32, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say no.
No.
I
No.
gotta say no.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, let's jump right back into this for a second and talk about solar installations. Thank you, sir, if you can have a seat, please.
Sure.
Solar installations on homes. Tom, do you want to jump on this real quick? You've said probably the most on
Oh, yeah, and so, I don't see my corrections as earth-shattering, but I stand corrected if Jennifer does. But, I would say under number 32-457, residential solar systems, number B, or letter B, letter B, number 2, it says equipment or device may not exceed the height of a building by more than 5 feet, and cover no more than 70% of the roof. I think that should say, should not exceed 35 feet, no matter what the height of the, is that a problem?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I would suggest that the by more than 5 feet remain in place and that a qualifier such as or 35 feet, whichever is greater, be placed in there.
Perfect.
Because you don't want a giant installation that's 10 feet above your roof line.
Idea. Good idea. That works. That's what I was getting at. That's the crux to my question. And then, and shall cover no more than 70% of the roof that's affixed. I don't know where that number came from. Where did we get that as a number? Did that?
Staff researched other ordinances that were in place in other similar communities. Some of it had to do with just from when you set it back from the roof line and have eaves, et cetera, what percentage remains after it, to ensure that you're not covering every square foot of a roof line, if you will.
Okay.
So other communities that staff research had very similar, somewhere in the 70-75% coverage range, and so that was put in for discussion purposes.
Okay.
Can I just show, this is.
Sorry, well, you'd have to get called on by the mayor. I don't know if he's willing to call you up, but,
Let us go through this. We have questions. We'll ask you.
okay, so I guess I defer to the 70% of the roof. I have no, if that's what it is, that's what you've got. I don't know, I stand corrected if it's.
I would ask staff to consult with local experts on that and determine whether or not that is appropriate, and then bring back an explanation as to why that's appropriate. I
Okay.
mean, a little more information for us.
Okay, then number C of the same section, number 1, where it says solar energy system shall only be allowed on a parcel that is, I'm open for suggestions, but I think smaller lots could allow solar, they just have to be smaller arrays.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I just want to make a clarification that these are the ground-mounted arrays, not the rooftop arrays.
No,
So
I know.
this is, I know, I want to
Sure,
make sure everybody
absolutely.
understands
Yep,
that.
got it.
It's when you
Circle
have
that.
a single pole and you have an array that's affixed to it.
Yep.
And it can be up to 15 feet tall, et cetera. So I just want to make sure it's clear that, obviously, the comprehensive plan, which we've talked about several times,
Right.
brought up a 5-acre lot minimum in terms of the solar protection piece of it. It tied back to that, but it also had to do with the ability to visually screen. But whatever the appropriate size that you believe it is, staff is more than willing.
And I did read that, and it said of our minimum 5-acre lot size. I don't think it was, to me, the way I read it, didn't mean it was limiting to 5-acre lots. It was, and we do have some small lots. That's the way I took it, but, so I would suggest, I mean, I don't, 2 acres, or there's, I mean, I don't understand, 5, but if we go to 2, that takes in a lot of the 1970 lots that were developed, like mine and a lot of other people's. And I think that's a big enough lot, you could probably have something. I don't know if we want to put in a limit of how much you could have there, square footage wise, the footprint. Maybe we limit the footprint under 5 to,
Footprint to the kilowatts, Jennifer, I don't know if you've looked at other cities, how they tend to kind of limit that a little bit.
Number 4 addressed that, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Staff did look at that from other ordinances in terms of how other
Square feet.
communities have addressed it.
but under 5, maybe we make it 500. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's a suggestion. You're gonna be bringing this back, so that would hopefully be okay. And then number 3, where it talks about solar energy system shall be set back a minimum of 100 feet from the property lines. Do we want to do property lines? Do we do in the front property line? Because if it's in your backyard, that would naturally screen it. So you would be in your backyard. So maybe it could be the side and the front. I guess I would be over, but then I think if the lot is under 10 acres, then it would fall back into our city setbacks, which I don't have in front of me right now, so I don't remember if the lots are smaller, what the setbacks are for side and front and.
Our side yard setback right now is 20 feet, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. So the intent obviously was really more from a protection from adjacent residential structures. So as I stated in my presentation, I think it would certainly make sense that language be revised, that really the setback, additional setback beyond what the zoning district setback requirements were really from a screening from adjacent residential or principal structures, not necessarily everything else. So
Right.
the planning commission, when they spoke about this, and then also the community solar gardens, really had to do with being able to screen from adjacent residential structures.
Right.
And then the public right of way. Everything else was sort of not a huge deal, but the ability to screen from those two things. So I think that language would be or should be adjusted to reflect those two conditions, as opposed to if it's in a rear and there's nothing around, as long as it meets the rear yard setbacks, then what's the problem, so to speak?
Exactly. Well, I just want to make it, yeah, because the smaller lots, we've done that for building, building different things. The setbacks have changed for smaller lot sizes. Certain things have changed. So I would just, if we're going to go smaller with the lot size in number one, then I think we have to adjust the setbacks maybe for smaller lot size. 100 feet for screening from the property lines is fine on a 10-acre lot. I don't have a problem with that. Just if we do decide to go smaller, then we have to determine, if it's under 10, then what do we do? Just open for discussion, guys. I don't know.
Yep.
I'm just,
Are you done or not?
yeah, I'm done. It's only a thing.
Yeah, I'd like to move to table this discussion and send this back to our city planner. Maybe she can reference a few other cities and be a little bit more clear on the issue. I think we're losing our crowd. We have till about 10 o'clock to finish the rest of the city council meeting, and I don't think this is going to be done at this time, so.
We're essentially doing that right now by giving Jennifer sort of marching orders. If you want to jump in here and actually have some suggestions, keep in mind, this is 12 months, as I understand?
Correct.
Okay, and how much time do we have left?
I would have to check, Mr. Mayor.
Months is what we have left. So essentially, that's
About
what we're.
2-3 months ago.
Yeah, that's what we're doing, so.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, could I ask one clarifying question? Just based on Mr. Carr's, Councilmember Carr's comments about reduced setbacks. I'd like to know if there are reduced setbacks, what portion of the ordinance I might find those in, because they're the standard for A1, A2, and R1. And so, offline, if I could,
There's something.
that?
There's something. I know there is. We'll find it. I'll try to find it.
I ran into that as well. Kevin, I have a question for you. I
Yes.
don't remember this. Mr. Lanu has brought forward a table motion. Do we need to vote on that immediately?
Well, someone should second it, I believe.
Yeah.
Second.
You got a second there? Okay, all those in favor of tabling as Mr. Lanu's motion stated, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye? 3 tables? You want to table it?
I tabled it, yeah.
Okay, table it. And no. Okay, so 3-2 we're tabling and handing it back to the planner for more work. Let's move on then.
Mr. Mayor, council members, can you just please clarify the vote? Who voted nay?
Danny and I believe.
Oh, I voted yes.
You voted yes? I voted nay.
Just one no.
That's correct.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, could I ask one clarifying question also?
Sure.
I just want to make sure that it's clear, and the city attorney can correct me, that this still remains under a moratorium then at this point. The moratorium has not been lifted. Is that correct, Mr. Attorney?
That's my opinion, yes.
Okay.
Okay. Moving on, looks like we have new business, consideration of request for payment to Mike Regan, Keswick Flooding. Kim, can you tell us about this?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, council members, as you can see in your packet, which I am having a hard time finding, Mr. Regan had submitted some bills for the pumping that he did in the early spring and actually throughout the summer for the flooding out on Jocelyn and Keswick. The watershed district has helped him out with those pumping costs, and he is requesting some help from the city to cover the rest of those costs, which was actually in the amount of $690 per month for a total of $1,380. He noted in his email that was sent over with the supporting documents that the pump system was not used in August. So, like I said, the watershed district helped him out quite a bit and helped the residents in the city of Grant. And he is requesting a payment in the amount of $1,380.
Okay, well, Mr. Reagan did step in when we needed his assistance. He's used his land, he's run pipes across his land, he's done a number of good things for the residents down in Sunnybrook. So I would go ahead and move to approve this $1,380 total. Can I get a second before we discuss?
Second.
Great, thank you very much. Go ahead.
Okay, at this time, council, I've talked to the contractor that Mr. Reagan has not received his last month's billing for August. He did rent the equipment and did not give notification. until the end of August to remove the equipment. It's like leasing a car for 6 months, going out of town for 2 months and say, I don't want to pay for the 2 months I was on vacation. So we do have another $3,000 bill, so at that time, I would recommend that the city of Grant also approve the future bill coming up at this point for the month of August, and the payment on that, and so that this can all be cleaned up at one month.
What you have then, there is a friendly amendment to my motion, is that correct?
Yes.
Not accepted. I don't have any documentation in front of me whatsoever, so no. I'm gonna go ahead and call the question. All those in favor of expending $1,380 to Mike Regan for his pumping services, please say aye. Oh, Denny, sorry, I missed you.
Question
Yep.
first, quick. Is any of this bill been absorbed by Mike himself? I mean, I know he's done a good
Yeah.
job here, and we admire that.
That's a good
Just a
question, and I do not have the answer to that at this point. But that's a question that's gonna be asked and answered, because I think everyone in this situation, whether it be Sunnybrook or Washington County, or certainly the watershed, everyone's got some skin in this game.
Well-
And there's a benefit to almost everyone
Yeah,
in this.
the only reason that I ask that is, I'd like to know
Yeah,
where it goes, and
yeah.
It's a good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it needs to be asked, and like I say, it needs to be answered. I won't entertain paying another bill until I have the answers to that question.
I'm happy to do this on a one-time thing. I don't want to set a precedence.
Right, and that's exactly right. We need to make sure that that situation down there has been properly engineered and all the questions have been properly answered before we move forward. Mr. Lanu?
Yeah, Mr. Reagan has incurred expenses and time and help to pay that. I believe he's incurred a lot of that cost himself. What he's asking is a very minimal support for the city. For those of you that went to the watershed, they went from looking at a $100,000 project by the time they got done with engineering, attorneys, and easements. It went to a $1.7 million project they wanted us to get involved in.
Well-
So this is very minimal at this point. He has had expenses. Mr. Reagan, we should be thanking him for what he's done.
And we have multiple times, and we're gonna pay
anybody's
him.
debating that.
Yeah, no one's debating. Thank you very much. All those in favor of paying this bill 1380, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We got 5-0?
Yep.
Excellent, let's move on.
Mr. Mayor, council members, I will just note that with that approval, that check will be on the next bill list.
Thank you very much. City council reports, future agenda items. Mr. Carr made a motion that was approved by the majority of the council to remove a couple of these items. We have asked, I'm not sure how many times, 10 or 15 times, to have some sort of documentation on these future agenda items so that we can have an intelligent discussion. What basically this part of our agenda has degenerated into is sort of a gripe session of a sort, so that folks are making political points. It's getting a little old, and I would, from my perspective, say to all present, the council members up here and staff, that I would consider removing discussion items or heavily modifying it if we continue to have the same type of gripe sessions with no backup documentation for any of the future agenda items, which it is supposed to be used for, present in the packet. In fact, I will start moving on that next month if I don't see a change on this. I'm gonna start this off and let the council know that I have had a memo drafted using our policy manual language, which you can all find in the policy manual you're given, that alerts the consultants, our outside consultants, that any more entertaining of individual council members, phone calls, and personal visits will not be seen by the city as their responsibility to pay that bill. And the reason being, it's quite simply put in our public policy manual for the staff and us, that those questions are supposed to go through the clerk so that that information can then be disseminated to all of us, so that we're actually spending money wisely. And I know we're all concerned about spending money wisely. So that's what I'm gonna tell everybody. That was my council update. That's been sent out to the staff, to the consultants, and they know not to do that any further. I'm gonna jump right to moratorium on commercial use. Councilmember Cedarstrom, you have given us some information on this, and I would like to hear your thoughts on this, sir.
Okay. First of all,
as technology changes, we have to change our ordinances to keep up with it. We did it with solar. I mean, we're working with the solar now. Before that, we did the cell phone towers. We've worked through that. And now the situation we're getting into is some waste disposal. Okay, and let me give you a little background on this. I've farmed for 24 years in the city of Grant. This property is across the street from me. The gentleman kind of put some false information on the permits that I've seen, and I have all the permits. I've reviewed them. I've talked to Washington County Conservation Department, talked to Alex down there, I've talked to Fran Miron, I've talked to Pete Orpett. I've talked to multiple people at the MPCA. And one of the things that they did not have was a completed permit for an acre or more of disturbance. Now, this land is across the street from me. I'm very familiar with it. I farmed it for 6 to 8 years, so I know exactly what's in that field. As a matter of fact, there was a big rock that I'd have to pull a plow up over, you know, so I know exactly. I'm very familiar with that. Well, he said there was garbage and crap, but that's beside the point. I witnessed a pit being dug, a liner being put in, and 15 to 20 Hydrovac trucks a day going in there. Matter of fact, 2 Saturday nights ago, there was a convoy of 6 trucks at 8:30 at night in the dark coming in and unloading, dumping. There's approximately 8 yards. For those of you who don't know what a Hydrovac truck is, it's a kind of a combination of a pressure washer and a vacuum cleaner. And what they do, instead of using a backhoe to repair, for example, a sewer line, because there's a water line right next to it, after they cut the asphalt out, they take pressurized water, make mud or quote-unquote a slurry, then they suck it up, and of course they truck it away. That way the people can repair the street without injuring any of the other pipes or what or not are in the city. Now, I have a boarding stable, so I'm around all day. I'm frequently outside and observing what's going on. So, like I said, I'm right across the street. I know very intimately what that land is because I've worked it for years. And I was very upset by all of a sudden all these trucks coming and dumping, like I said, 15 to 20 a day. Now, I started signaling a warning August 14th. I called the building inspector and said, gee, is someone building a house across the street? Because there's a lot of excavation going on. Well, he went out there and he told him he had to get a grading permit. Well, you know, it's obvious to me it wasn't just grading. There was a Ziegler rental, a D6 there. Then he brought in one of the larger backhoes that they have, and there've been a constant parade of things being dumped. We don't know where it's coming from. However, one of the residents after the Saturday night fiasco, and by the way, the comment from Fan Miron, our county commissioner, says, hey, if they're dumping in the darkness at night, they're probably up to no good, quote unquote. Okay? Then I saw what was going on and I started making phone calls. And I've been ridiculed over this through various emails. And by the way, if you want to see there is a packet on the back shelf that outlines some of the things that have went on. So if you want to read about it. But I became very concerned. And I think, thankfully, Mr. Carr I went through the ordinance book and couldn't find something. It was kind of buried in the zoning. But I did do some research and include a bunch of things that ordinances on dumping. And thank you, Mr. Carr, for including that, by the way, that they're not supposed to be dumping a liquid-type waste within 1,000 yards of a well. Well, there's got to be 15 or 20 wells within 1,000 yards of where he was going.
Lauren, I'm going to stop you for just a second.
It's not commercial is the point I'm making.
You have made your case. I understand the background. I think you've given us tons of background, and unfortunately that resident's not here, but you've identified his location pretty well. So I think we all know who you're talking about. You've made your case. Talk to us about this moratorium on commercial use, how you see it being written, how you see it being done.
Well, I think what we should do is like I gave the Dakota County, they have a complete ordinance on it. What I think we need to do is we have to have a moratorium. We have to get up to date with the new types of dumping that we have going on. We have to develop some ordinances so we can regulate this. Look at what happened in South Washington County. I talked to Jenny Yingling, who was with the health department. I've talked with her extensively. She said there's 140,000 people in South Washington County that can't drink their well water. One of the things we're trying to do is preserve Grant as being rural and beautiful. You know, and I'm a near organic horse farmer. I don't even spray for flies. I use fly predators for Pete's sake, so I'm not completely crazy, but I mean, I try to err on the side of safety. And I think we have to get a moratorium, much like we've done on some of the other things like the solar gardens, and we have to get this regulated. We can't let people just come in and start dumping. The other thing I'm very disappointed about is I've been at this for 6 weeks, calling and talking to everybody I possibly can, and I think the staff really dropped the ball in this one. We went and went to Eckberg Lammers asking for a moratorium, and we got blown off. But it finally has gotten on, and by the way, the other thing I want to add is last Thursday, the MPCA had 4 departments in there. They also are working with Washington County Conservation District, which I talked to, and they were aware of another dump site. They weren't aware of this, that it's still being used. So I think we have to have a moratorium till we can get this defined, because we have to protect our groundwater. I think it's very important. So that's what the direction I'd like to see.
Okay, thanks. Let me ask you just a couple of questions, Larry, before you comment. This is Lauren's, so we're gonna ask questions of Lauren. You provided me in the packet the Dakota County Disposal of Solid Waste Ordinance. And I read through it, and it's interesting because all that you've given me is section 3, so 301. So what 3 deals with is offsite reuse of minimally contaminated soil from development projects and road construction projects. And to read a definition of this again, I'm reading directly from what you've given me, contains less than 1% by volume solid waste, debris, or asbestos-containing material, and is free from visual, stinging, and chemical odor. Organic vapors less than 10 parts per million is measured by a photoionization detector, or PID. For petroleum-impacted soil, less than or equal to 50 milligrams or kilograms diesel range organics or gasoline range organics. Xylenes and lead is also called out here. Now, I don't particularly like the site you're speaking of, and I think it should have been done in a more, well, let's just say I think it could have been done in a more comprehensively different way to minimize the impact and minimize the fright that perhaps you and others have felt. I get that. However, we have now stopped this gentleman twice. He has agreed to test the material that he's bringing in voluntarily through Braun Intertech, an independent testing company worldwide. He's done all this, and you and I both know, because we're on the council and we got the initial memo from the site visit, that the photoionization detector that was used on the site came back negative. There was nothing there. So you and I also know that a Hydrovac truck and a dump truck can carry contaminated soil, they can carry clean soil. It really depends on where it's coming from. So, you know, I'm not sure that a moratorium may be the place to go with this quite yet, because number one, everyone keeps calling it dumping and dumping and dumping, and dumping has a specific legal term, and dumping is refuse. And if the photoionization testing that they've already done, and then the laboratory testing that is supposed to be coming in here in the next day or so, confirms that frankly it's clean fill, then whether or not it comes from a Hydrovac truck or whether or not it comes from a dump truck, clean fill is clean fill. But I do have to agree with you on some of the optics of it. It could have been handled.
If I could-
It could have been handled better.
If I could point something out.
Sure.
You know, there should be a manifest for these, where they come from, and they should be tested. You know,
Well, let's- yeah,
on
yeah.
Monday, they said they were gonna test them on Wednesday. That's like going out on Saturday night and getting a DUI, and the sheriff's gonna tell you on Monday, hey, we want you to come in for a breathalyzer.
Yeah, it's not perfect. I don't think anything is, and I think that really the best place to handle something like this from the beginning, Lauren, and I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just trying to be constructive here, is in our grading permit, how those grading permits are structured, time, you know, where's the material coming from? Is it coming from a Miller? Is it coming from a Shifsky? Or is it coming independently? And if it's coming independently, perhaps we need to know where this stuff is coming from. So, you know, all of those things can be handled, I think, on a grading permit pretty quickly by the council, because I'm sure you have some very definitive ideas on how to tighten that up, as well as other members of the council.
Well, the other point I wanted to make, this isn't just a happy homeowner bringing a couple loads in to fix his yard. This guy runs a company that has 10 trucks. They're tandem axle Kenworths with pushers and pullers. They're pulling approximately 8 yards of dirt with the water. Now, this is a commercial dumping operation. It's not a private citizen. And I think we need to regulate things that are proceeding on a commercial basis, and that's what this in fact was doing.
I would like to be able to prove that it was in fact a commercial basis, but that would be saying like one of the heavy equipment operators that lives in town, and I think you know who I'm talking about, if he were to use his own trucks to bring in clean fill, is it then a commercial operation? I think you see that it's sort of a difficult thing to pin down and say that it's commercial, because without the profit motive there, just because somebody's using their own equipment, doesn't mean they're not, number one, bringing in clean fill. Number two, maybe it's actually costing them money because they're paying for the guys and they're paying for the gas. And we don't know is the problem. It's very, very difficult, very, very difficult to prove is my point there.
It isn't. You open your eyes and you see the trucks coming. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out.
Larry, go ahead.
All right, Brad, I've got a couple questions here. Now, earlier, Mayor Huber said he's going to put together policies and procedures that councilmen are not allowed to come to talk to you, come to talk to our attorney without direction. It's in our public policies.
Already there.
And yes, that policy is meaningless, because it wasn't until Councilman Setterstrom and myself come in asking for a cease and desist on this order, we have proven through documentation that they did not have a Minnesota pollution control permit, which was required. So, Brad, in the application that you put in for the permit, you didn't have a full legal description in a permit application. You said that they had 25 acres when indeed documentation shows they have 3. You failed miserably in doing that. Now, I told our attorney that if he did not order a cease and desist, I would try to go to a judge and get a writ of mandamus ordering that this be stopped if he cannot prove that all precautions have been taken. Now, how is it that Mr. Huber wrote all kinds of letters saying all the permits have been done and applied for, and when indeed they were not? The Browns Creek, to this date, still does not have a completed application for the permit for Browns Creek. The MPCA does not have a permit. Now, you wrote a letter in defense of this operation. Mr. Huber wrote demeaning emails to all the citizens that were concerned, and he stated in his email that we have on the back that all the permits were in place. How is it that after being asked to have a cease and desist until it was proven, our attorney wrote a letter in support of it, the operation?
Is that
You
a
wrote
question for Brad? the
Yes,
engineer?
yes, it is.
Brad, don't answer any legal questions.
Don't answer a legal question.
Just
How
the
was it that it
attorney.
got
Just
this
the
far?
attorney.
You do know that it required an NDA or a stormwater permit for this application for disturbing more than an acre. That is your job. I talked to your boss,
Are
Brett
you going to
Weiss.
just berate him, or are you going to ask him
No,
a
I'm
question?
gonna say, how did
Ask
it?
him a question.
All right, my
Now.
question is, you failed miserably. I move
That's
at
not a
this time,
question.
well, that is my question to the citizens of Grant that are getting a contaminated source. We feel
Okay,
that.
ask a question or you're done. Ask a question of the engineer. We are not going to
All right.
berate the staff because you
All
feel
right.
like it.
Brad, did you have an MPCA permit for this operation?
And MPCA?
Yeah, Minnesota Pollution Control, did you have that permit
It
in
was-
place before you issued your grading permit, which is required?
We did
Was
not
there
know-
one issued by the MPCA?
Let him answer the question.
No,
But it is required by the state.
if they're disturbing more than 1 acre.
And did this ground, was it disturbing more than 1 acre?
I did not go out and measure his land.
Okay, Brad, let me ask you this, question, Brad. Brad, let me ask you this question. Can a grading permit be issued to a resident if we are unaware whether or not the MPDES, do we issue grading permits without checking with the MPCA? Is that normal and practical? Do we do that often?
Sure, it's left up to the property owner to
Right.
fill out the application for a grading permit if they're disturbing more than 1 acre.
And to pursue the permits themselves. The city does not babysit, the city does not nanny
My
them.
responsibility to fill out the applications for them and.
Yeah, and to get the work done. Okay.
Then
Yeah.
Brad, let me finish by asking this question. Once it was brought to the attention that it was in excess of 1 acre, and that it needed a permit, do you feel that Eckberg Lammers would have been held liable for allowing this to happen without ordering a cease and desist for another several weeks? Because I believe the city was put at risk and that we could have contaminated. I talked to one of the head engineers from 3M that said the soil's taken out by 3M, or some of them are being taken out around that area because they're corroding their pipes in the ground.
Highly acidic.
Highly acidic, and that's what you brought out into the city of Grant.
Do you have documentation proving that, or do you two just make a bunch of random phone calls and then come here and claim this is what people have told
wanna
you?
know why our city
Where
attorney-
is it?
I have one simple
Where's the
question,
proof?
and this will be of our city
No
attorney.
proof.
Why
No
did
proof.
you, why did you write a cease and desist after you wrote a letter in support? Why did you write the cease and desist letter for this project?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by a letter in support. To be clear, I wrote a memo to the council,
That's the one I'm
stating my
referring to.
findings of the investigation that staff conducted. It was conducted because there were complaints from citizens, and when complaints are received, staff is tasked with investigating the complaints. As a result of that, I issued a memo saying, on all of my investigation, it seemed to me that everything was in line for this project, other than the fact that I did not have evidence of an NPDES permit having been issued by the MPCA. Frankly, I determined that and found that myself. It was not directive from Mr. Lanou or Mr. Cedarstrom. They came to my office and told me that there was some MPCA regulation that banned the use of Hydrovac trucks without a permit, and that was absolutely false.
Right.
And the NPDES permit was determined by myself based upon information in my own research, not anything that anyone told me. And upon determining that that sort of permit was required, I asked the city engineer to verify whether such a permit existed. The city engineer contacted the property owner multiple times to try to verify whether such a permit existed. When the property owner did not confirm that to the engineer, I then issued a cease and desist letter. That is the sequence of events that occurred.
The same cease and desist letter that Larry was able to procure against the school district for also, as the applicant, being responsible for the NPDES permit, not having one, correct?
Not
Right? Be quiet.
That was actually
Will you show our citizens more respect?
I will, when they quit yelling.
He wasn't
He
yelling.
wasn't yelling. Are you
I'm
saying
gonna
he acted
call
like a
him that.
fool?
You do not yell from the audience. If he does not respect the people that are elected to represent 4,000 residents, I owe him nothing. Keep
You owe him
moving
nothing.
forward.
That is your merit.
Keep
He does
moving
not want to listen
forward.
to the residents of
Keep
Grant.
moving forward.
All right, at this time, I'd like a motion that we ask for the immediate firing of the city attorney for his malfeasance in handling this thing.
Great. Do
I
you have a
have
second?
asked for documentation,
Get
and
a
he has
second.
failed to provide.
Second.
I'm not sure if you guys have seen this or not. See this right here? See where it says no action taken? Do you see that
Yep,
part there?
I see it. I
You
still
see
got
that
the
part?
motion on the floor. You can
Yeah,
call the
we're not gonna
question.
vote on it because there's no action taken. It's an illegitimate motion. Lauren, how would you like to take this complaint, or pardon me, Lauren, the moratorium on commercial use, and start by taking a look at the grading permit and seeing if we can tighten that up? Is that something you'd entertain?
Absolutely. We have to change the procedures. And in this, this was a very, I don't know, just a very strong misuse. I read the grading permit and what the guy said.
Well, I don't think.
And what I'm
anyone's
saying,
gonna-
there's not
yeah.
enough information on there
Yeah.
for them really to work on. We have to spell it out better. They have to know if they're messing up more than an acre. The other thing we have to direct, you and I obviously are looking at this from different points. You're saying a guy dumping, and now this has been since August, in 6 weeks, even if they just do 10 trucks a day, that's almost 500 trucks. There were 600 trucks dumped. That is commercial. We have to define what commercial is.
Okay.
On 3 acres, he's put approximately 30,000 or 3,000 to 5,000 minimum yards of dirt there. That is a commercial operation, and we have to define that in the grading permit. If you're a happy homeowner, you can do some things, but if you have a company and, this isn't just like a contractor bringing, 5 yards of sand home because he's gonna lay blocks the next day. This is a
understand.
commercial operation, and we have to define that. He needs a
Got that.
conditional use permit for that.
We understand, and I think the good place to start on
He's
that
potentially
is the
contaminating
tightening
our
up the
water supply.
grading permit, so that that information is available for us to do the enforcement, because without more information, we can't do the enforcement lawfully. We find ourselves in a very bad place. Mr.
I agree.
Crowe.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I'd ask for a little latitude. I had my material transferring per city ordinance
Right.
item, which really kind of goes along with Lauren's item on the agenda, so with a little latitude, if I could bring that up now, since we're talking about this. that
Well, do you find yourself in support of Mr. Cedarstrom's
no.
points here?
No, I do not, but.
Okay.
Of the moratorium, I'm not done yet. I'd like, that's what I'm saying, could I have the latitude to bring my material up now? Because I think it would be remiss to go to legislative update and then start talking about my point.
Well, I agree, because
Okay.
memories are short, so
Yeah,
why don't you go ahead and jump onto that?
All right, so what Lauren just said about business and everything, I couldn't agree with more. I was shocked when I found out what was happening, dismayed that we couldn't stop it, didn't stop it. I am not jumping up and down saying this person did something wrong because he's not here. I don't have any proof. I don't go around accusing people. The optics are horrible. What he's bringing in, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I thought it was waste. I was educated during the process, the fact that dirt is not waste. If it's in liquid form, it's not waste. Imagine my surprise. Thought it was waste. So I learned that tree limbs are waste and concrete's waste, but things coming from the earth, dirt, sand, water, gravel, rocks, they're earth materials, they're not waste. Shocked, trees are waste, I didn't know. You regulate all that, but you can't regulate dirt. So I talked to the Ramsey County hazardous waste guy, I talked to the Washington County hazardous waste guy. I found out it's dirt, and they don't have regulations against it. You can dump dirt even if it's wet. So then I looked through the ordinance, says, well, we gotta have something to stop this. We got landfill, as Lauren brought up, and I sent around, but it's hazardous solid waste landfill, not solid material, earth material, which is what that was. So that ordinance doesn't apply because dirt isn't waste, even in liquid form. So we don't allow liquid waste, but liquid dirt is not waste. And there's what Jeff had mentioned before, which he's totally correct on. Some of the definitions of what you call things really make a big difference when you're trying to regulate them. Our staff did what they thought they had to do based on what they knew. I think there was some missteps maybe along the way from people. I think the gentleman might not have been totally forthright on what was happening. I think it is a commercial operation. I don't think it should have been allowed. I think we could have stepped up and stopped it. We didn't. He is bringing stuff in that's supposed to be tested. I'm not exactly sure how that works because the people I talk to, a lot of times they test the site, they don't test every truck. Because if you go to Pace, and who are they testing with? I forgot who the people were.
Braun.
Braun, and I'm not sure how if Braun can test a truck for a cheap matter, but Pace, if they test a site, the environmental, they charge $300. But typically what they do, my understanding from other pumping companies, is they test the site. They don't test every truck. So I'm not exactly sure how they're testing it. I think this was just basically a business, a way to get around our ordinance by, he's a homeowner. I mean, he owns the lot. So that's a problem. But, so looking at all this, being really, really, really frustrated and rather upset, and for all the neighbors and everything, and it's dumping at night, come on, give me a break. So I was rather upset with this, but rather than just being frustrated and yelling and calling it things it's not, I'm looking for a solution, okay? We don't want people coming into residential areas and dumping trucks at 8:30 at night. That is absolutely ridiculous. So it needs to stop, okay? So rather than looking at this particular person, which it sucks. I don't know how we got to this point, but it is what it is. And I'd like to stop it. I don't know how. And I have to rely on staff because I sit up here and we have to do things legally, okay? And we have to do things the right way. Otherwise, we get in trouble. And if we get in trouble, all of us get in trouble. And I can't have that. So I started looking, and there are what's called different remedies to do this. Lauren mentioned one, and I talked to Jennifer briefly about that. But there's ways to license trucks, get manifests, where you pick it up, where you dump it off. There's ways to remedy this kind of thing, and that's a good point Lauren made. The other way is to just have what's called maybe a material ordinance. Material being anything. I'm talking scrap metal. I mean, and don't get me wrong. I love Grant, and Grant is a place to come home and dump your stuff a lot of times for residents, and I don't want to change that, okay? If you have a small, but you're doing stuff, because that's what we like, that's why we're here. That's why you have the large lots, and I don't want that to change. But when somebody abuses that, as this, I feel, has been abused, in my opinion, which I can have, and I'm not blaming anybody, so in my opinion, this has been abused, not, you know, the staff, not by the staff, but the person, then I feel it's abused, then we have to do something. And if we could do some kind of material ordinance, that also could be something we could use. I defer to Jennifer how that fits in with our nuisance ordinance, our landfill, maybe we change it to a landfill / materials dump, not dumping, Jeff made a point, dumping means something, you know, landfill / material. Then that ordinance that we already have in the use table would also apply. So there's multiple things we can do constructively rather than being, I can't even imagine what you guys are, I mean, I'm shocked. And it's horrible. But right now, we have to figure a way to stop this from future use, and if we can, for what, but I don't know if we can with this particular person, but you know, a lot of times what happens when something happens, you have to work through the process to make sure it doesn't happen again. I am concerned we become a dumping ground for all the slurry in Ramsey County, and I don't want that to happen. So I think we have to look about it. Now, do we need a moratorium for that? No. Lauren's talking about a moratorium on commercial use. He's not, if he's doing it commercially, he needs a CUP. So the grading permit's a good first step to tighten that up. Then what we gotta look at is you know, I heard a lot about contaminant. It hasn't been proven to me it's contaminants. It's slurry, for lack of a better word. And if it's not, what can we do if it's not really contaminated? Now, I don't know the testing process and all that, so I beg to differ on that. You know, you could correct me and hopefully incite what's going on, because I don't know. But there's options that we can do. But I think the problem is we're a rural residential place, and we shouldn't have these kind of activities out here. And you shouldn't have to be subjected to this. And I think with the tightening up of our ordinances, looking at this objectively, getting down to what's going on and what we can do, and having a really good conversation about this, I think we can fix this, so this doesn't happen to anybody else again. I apologize for what's happening to you now, and that's wrong. But whatever, it happens.
We find ourselves in a position because of, Lauren makes a good point, and tightening up the grading permit is a good place to start here. We find ourselves in a position of a legal limbo where we could not move here, whether, as I've made clear in all of my horrid emails, that the optics of this situation were never optimal. No one liked it. No one liked what it looked like. No one likes what it looks like now. However, this council has to abide by the law in terms of stopping people with a lawful use. If it's within the bounds, and the only people that we can talk to determine whether or not it's in the bounds are the people I've talked to: Brad Reefstack, Eckberg Lammers, MPCA, Washington County Environmental. Who else have I talked to? The watershed districts. Who else? I think that was it. Gary.
Talked to some city administrators.
City administrator. I've talked to a couple of city administrators. And unfortunately, no legal way, because the grading permit itself wasn't really violated, with the exception of the NPDES permit that was not done. But again, we do not babysit these people to make sure they did it. Even the school district didn't have it, as Larry was quick to point out, and they got a cease and desist as well. So I think we can all agree no one likes what's going on. But the smart and practical way to do this is to take that grading permit and reevaluate it. Reevaluate the stuff that's in that grading permit, reevaluate the information that goes in the grading permit, and reevaluate how those grading permits are issued. That's the smart and practical way to move forward here. Larry?
Okay, at this time, I would ask that the council consider allowing one of the members in the audience, Mr. Jacob Kyle, who did write, and Ms. Patrice Megger, to our mayor, to allow them to get up and speak on behalf of their concerns and how they were treated through their emails going back and forth. You were attacked for your political stand through the emails. You've documented that very well. Your concerns were just, we cannot allow contamination in our city. when trucks come from 3M Saturday evening at 8:30 in the evening, there is reason for real concern in Grant. If we contaminate our water supply, we will have Met Council. So when we look at our zoning, maybe we should be drafting language that states that any potential for contaminants dumping in their fill permit must have documentation that it is, if it has a potential for contamination, should be reviewed, and they're gonna be responsible if it does.
And that would be part of the grading permit thing, and by the way, no one's standing up.
But-
Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, council members, I will just ask, is there any direction from the council to staff?
Yeah, let's
Address these
let's get on this. It's getting late. I'm talking, Larry. Yeah, the citizens of Grant are not coming up to speak. We had public comment. They didn't make it. No, they're not at this portion. So, the direction that I would give, of course, they're welcome to follow the rules. You should try it. To tighten up the grading permit, and I think that the council would probably have some recommendations for you in terms of the time. I think 7 PM is too late. I think 7 AM is too early, 7 to 7. I think the time limit on this needs to be shortened.
9 to 5.
Well, 9 to 5, and then the time limit.
Of days.
Oh, yeah, shorter too.
Yeah, shorter, and then the length of days. I would like to see that. I think 14 days is plenty to bring in most of these fill projects. And what that does is that minimizes the ability for anyone, just right off the bat, that 14-day minimizes the ability for anyone to make a commercial profit on it, because they really don't have the time frame to do it.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Mayor, also, may I add one thing?
Please, go ahead.
One of the things I was made aware of, that one of the things that they do, in fact do with these hydrovac trucks in North St. Paul, they're currently hydrovacing out the sludge of the bottom. Now, there's heavy metal in some of those types of things, and Lord knows what, in some metropolitan areas, what they put down the toilets. So my concern is you can't, it's not realistic to measure every truck that comes in, but we need to have a manifest so we know where the stuff's coming from.
Yeah.
And that's the point, and I think if we have to restructure the grading permit, and you're right, 14 days, something like that would be fine, but we also have to define it that in fact it's not a commercial operation. There's been several dumping sites, and I've talked to Washington County about this, that they're chasing it, and some little old lady's 80 years old and got a 20-acre field, and some guy says, hey, she's on Social Security, hey, I'll give you $500 if I can dump in your field. She doesn't know what's going on. So what we have to do is be proactive and set it up so it isn't so easy for someone to abuse the law, is what I'm saying.
No, I got you, and hang on a second, Tom. I understand what you're saying. I'm just at a loss to determine how that would be done practically within the law, and I'd look to the planner and the lawyer, not right now, but to look at these questions moving forward in between our council meetings. The other thing that I may suggest to you, Jennifer, is that the deliverer of the fill is identified. So for example, I'm building this, I'm building that, who's great, who are you contracting with to deliver your fill? Now, if it's a commercial fill operator, the guys that we know in town, the guys that do some of our fill operations in the city, they've got a vested interest to bring in,
Good fill,
clean fill. They've got a vested interest there. Other folks may not have that same vested interest, and I wonder if we could identify those using manifests or some such. Kim?
Mr. Mayor and council members, let's just be clear, if you're looking at tightening up the grading permit, that would be directed to the city engineer.
Pardon
He would
me,
bring
sorry.
something
I
back.
said Jennifer, didn't I?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. I meant Brad.
If you're going to be
I
looking at
apologize.
revising ordinances, then.
Yeah, no, I apologize, Jen. I was actually directing those remarks to Brad. Tom, you had something?
Well, and I don't know if this is directed towards Brad or not, but Brad, they've mentioned the street sweepings and stuff. My understanding in the cities, when they sweep streets and all that stuff, they bring that to one of their facilities where they kept the trucks and everything else. They put it in a corner, they let it dry out, they sift it, they sort it, and then when it's safe, they go and they dump it. So I wouldn't expect any of that coming out. So I don't know if we have to reference that in the permit, that no street sweepings, that kind of thing is allowed to be brought in.
Sure.
I think that would alleviate part of Lauren's issue and mine too, that would be, I think the frequency of truck travel, frequency of how many loads a day might be something, the volume and the loads per day. I think the one thing we get out here, what I found, which I was shocked again, is that these trucks, if the load is sanitary, as Jeff, it's dirt, it's liquefied dirt. And we can't tell people you can't
Know
dump.
how to do it.
there's no way to really do it. You can't deny them it's dirt. Okay, what I have a problem with on the current site is they dug a huge hole, disturbed the whole area, and they're filling up the hole.
Yep.
I have a problem with that. It's either mining or some other kind of issue that should have never happened. These trucks, and I found out all over, a lot of times they come out and they dump on a field somewhere where they can just dry out and it's just sand, and the owner's fine with it, and they just do it. And by the time people start complaining, they're done, because they bring a few trucks out there and they're done. And at the end of the day, as long as if they took a test, it's dirt. The Washington County doesn't care necessarily. It disturbs the neighborhood and it's really bad. So the issue, what I have would be that if they're gonna do this, that has to be either surface or it has to be filling some. And I guess the biggest thing for me, and I think goes exactly what Lauren was saying, I totally agree with him. This is a commercial operation, there's no doubt in my mind, I think, in my opinion. Okay, what do you do? Well, what do you do? Okay, so the issue for me is use. What are you using it for? Because I don't think there's anybody in Grant that if you were literally using, and we do that a lot, I think we ask those questions in some of our permits, or CUPs or whatever, that what are you using it for? Are you filling in a spot because you want to put a pole barn? Are you filling in a spot because you want to put your house? And if you're gonna do that, you'd hope it'd be clean fill, because you don't think they're gonna dump dirty fill and then build their house on top of it. But if you're just coming to put it there because you can, is that what we want? I don't want that. I just don't want you to come in and just dump because you can, because it costs $200 to take it to a gravel pit and dump it.
disagrees with that.
So I
That's the
think.
method.
No, I know, that's what I'm trying to say. So what I'm saying is I'm trying to flesh this out because I'm not sure of the correct method. I'm just trying to voice my opinion because you want direction back to staff. Trying to direct staff is what my concerns are. And what other communities do, which I've tried to research, but I haven't contacted all communities, and there's a wealth of information I'm sure I haven't tapped into yet that I would rely staff on. So that would be my.
Let's give direction to them and then we'll get going here.
I think we've got.
Can we recognize somebody in the audience?
No, we can't.
Okay,
This is not public comment.
There will be public comment
There
at some
will be
point.
public comment on this, guys.
Yes.
We're gonna work on the
Okay.
grading permit, and then you'll be able to come up and talk.
Okay, one of the things I'd like to say is, as you're drafting this, Brad, we're not really quite as concerned with dump trucks as much as we are hydrovacs. If you go to his website, you will see he cleans up environmental spills. So when he cleans up an environmental spill one day, and he dumps half of his load out there, or he only has half a load left, and he goes to another site, we don't know what comes. So hydrovac trucks are a lot more susceptible to contamination than, say, a dump truck that just picked up, you know, a corner off a lot where they dug a basement and brought it out. Hydrovac is a very specific, and he says he has sites around the whole Twin Cities, and he just asks farmers to do it like he says. But if you look at his site, he says he goes to environmental places and picks up spills. I know what hydrovac trucks do. They go, you know, clean out septic trucks. It's not like a milk truck that delivers milk all week long, and on a weekend, a milk truck's not allowed to go out and deliver gasoline on the weekends. So make it very specific to hydrovac, because that is the biggest issue here, and that's gonna be what's gonna contaminate our soil, or potentially what we have out there. 3M being dumped at 8:30 in the night without a manifest does not speak well for our city.
Okay.
The other
Tom,
thing,
go ahead.
I
Hang on.
have two
Tom-
things I have to
Tom
follow up,
is out.
because I actually have material transferring. So I mentioned this to Jennifer, I provided sample ordinance from Michigan. I don't know if Jennifer has any weight on this, if she thinks this is a good idea or a bad idea. But I think a material just could be any kind of material coming in and out of grant, if it's something we need to look at. If Jennifer feels that that's something we should do, or if she could report on if that's a good idea or bad idea, maybe she could do that the next, you know, more input. The other thing was Lauren brought up, and I think we had briefly talked about the manifests and the licensing of trucks. I think that should be looked at too. That's it.
the one thing I wanted to add is this particular site, I was over there observing it, and they had put a membrane underneath, and then they put rocks on top of it, so they dug down to the gravel so the water would flow through, and then they piled it, and that's where those 20-foot high piles of dirt came from.
Gotcha, okay. We've given direction to the staff. We're gonna jump off of this. Tom, do you wanna read our community calendar for
No,
us,
I
please?
have an item on the
No, you
discussion.
really
Yes, I do.
don't. Oh,
Legislative
pardon me,
update.
he does, pardon me. Thank you, Mr. Lanu, I missed that. I've got so many notes here. Go ahead, please, and update us
All
on
right.
your legislative
I've got
adventures.
3 items, if you'd be kind enough to
try to-
hold back on your comment until I cover these. Okay, recently, our city council and staff was invited to the Capitol to tour the Capitol and speak to our legislators. Lauren and I are the only ones that took the time to appear, and so I will give you the legislative update that we spoke of. At the meeting, after that tour, we spoke specifically on legislation, and one of them is the legislation. We talked about the Senate File 1837 and House File 2097 was a topic of concern. It's a bill for an act prohibiting schools from being built within a quarter-mile of a toxic site exceeding residential levels of toxins, requiring annual notification of parents and staff of existing schools that exceed residential levels of toxins set by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Recently, Wildwood Elementary School in Matamidi has been added to a national database documenting toxic schools across America. That's item 1.
Who is sponsoring that bill, please?
The bill is Senator Cran, and one of them is Mary Franzen, along with some other legislators.
So Senator Cran is the prime sponsor of the bill? Is that correct?
It has had its first reading, and it will be brought up for other legislation. The next discussion we discussed was whether legislation should be written to limit abusive open enrollment to not more than 2 times the state average of open enrollment by the grade level. The effects of Matamidi School District's abusive open enrollment has had on closing of the 3 elementary schools in Stillwater District and the surrounding school districts. So we talked about legislation limiting it to no more than 2 times the state average because it has a detrimental effect on our neighboring communities. One of the other legislative. And the other legislative issue that we talked about was the state gas tax, 5,000 and less. So,
You took that off the agenda?
well, this is on my legislative deal. You didn't want to address it separately, so I'm going to tell you what our legislators are talking about. Number 1, the state has talked about we don't have the right to put a state gas tax for our city.
Right.
That's not going to be done. Years ago, it was determined it's for cities of 5,000. Now, I talked to both Senator Housley and Representative Lomer, and they both indicated that nobody else from our city staff that's campaigned on lowering and getting gas tax down to 4,000 have approached them and come and met with them personally to draft legislation. Legislation takes time. It takes a lobbying effort. It takes years to accomplish. That hasn't been done in our city. So we're talking about it, and some of the gas tax that, as they brought forward, for every dollar spent in maintenance on your roads, it saves $7 in further maintenance and repairs. So if we don't take the time to fix our roads adequately now, it is going to be more costly to do so, and that's what we're facing right now. We have failed miserably. If you want to get gas tax lowered or get that, we have to either meet that 5,000, or, Mr. Huber, perhaps you want to lead the charge down there lobbying at the state and bring them documentation why it should be lowered to 4,000 residents, and then our city would qualify. My proposal, and I talked to them about the city of Lakeland that also lowered its acreage to 2.5 acres to prevent sewer and water. And that was the Prevent Met Council coming in and taking over.
If you want to talk about that.
That's exactly what we're talking about. If we cannot get gas tax from our state.
Well, let me tell you what I've done on that. Let me tell you what I've done.
The legislator said you've not met with any of them. I could.
Yep, I'm sure, Larry. I'm sure you have, and I haven't spoken with any of them. That's okay. I've spoken with multiple legislators. We actually got 39,000.
Not our legislators. I find that amazing.
If I could speak for a moment, spoken with both Kathy and Karen and their aides several times. We got $39,000 this year, hopefully to get more through the through the special fund that they have set up to help small cities' infrastructure costs. That's $39,000 this year. Hopefully it goes up next year. In terms of a full-on lobbying effort, one of the reasons that the city pays dues and is associated with the League of Minnesota Cities is the League of Minnesota Cities is really our lobbying arm in the legislature. I have a job. I have a family. Honestly, I care about Grant. I like the way it is, but this is a part-time thing for me, and that's the way it has to stay. I have to provide for my family. So in terms of full-time lobbying, that's not going to happen from me. I do contact these people. We do have some money coming in, but that's as far as it's going to go for me. If you would like to spend all your time down there at the legislature, I highly encourage you to do so.
I do. That's
Thank
at
you.
Bill 1837,
Oh,
folks.
and
And if you would
I
like to
appreciate
get
it.
more information on that bill, go to thegrantreporter.com and get our honest newsletter.
Here we go. Monterey Public Schools Board Meeting, Thursday, October 12th and 26th, Monterey District Education Center, 7 p.m. Stillwater Public Schools Board Meeting, Thursday, October 12th, Stillwater City Hall, 7 p.m. Washington County Commissioners Meeting, Tuesdays, Government Center, 9 a.m. Make a motion to adjourn.
When's our newsletter coming out?
All those in favor, say
When's our newsletter coming out?
aye.
You can talk to her off camera.